of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time.
Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. Shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, or far ball, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missiles
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, good morning. Alex Phillips here with you until 1 o'clock, sitting in for the inimitable Julia Hartley-Brewer, who's off powdering the slopes or whatever they call it when you go on a ski holiday. I will be with you from 10 until 1 tomorrow as well. And then, of course, that is also my usual slot on a Saturday. Friday. Sorry about that. I'm already looking forward to the weekend, it seems. And thank you for your company again today. It's been a pleasure sitting in the hot seat. And, you know, every morning you do this job, and so you've got to be across the knees. You wake up, alarm goes off, you're whacking on the radio, you're skimming through all of the newspapers. I tend to do that just before I go to bed as well. And you wait for a day where you go, this is interesting news, this is different, this is good. The thing is, whenever there is different news circulating, it's always a blimmin' disaster. You're always like, I didn't think it could get worse. And now it has. And today, you know, the thing that's really jumped out at me, something that sort of made me feel quite a lot disturbed, if I'm honest. I'm a Trumpist, right? Everyone knows I went to inauguration, love the MAGA movement, love its positivity. And when Donald Trump said, I'm going to go and sit and speak with Vladimir Putin, everyone was up and I was going, this is appeasement, this is terrible. Oh, I was like, is this just Trump derangement syndrome? Because someone's got to go speak to the guy, haven't he? I mean, he might be a mortal enemy, but keep your enemies close. And George, you're better than War. And so I said, let's just wait to see what the deal is going to be. Anyway, things have been squishing out since then. The fact that there's a suggestion that America might essentially go after reparations from Ukraine for defending it, and not in the future, but for the stuff that's already been given. Normally, you go after the enemy to pay those reparations. And then I was like, well, OK, so maybe there's a sensible argument here that if America gets 50% of rare earth minerals, then actually it makes America more compelled to defend Ukraine and maintain those really vital assets in a geopolitical landscape. But then it seems to me that, I don't know, the narrative shifted in a direction I was hoping it wouldn't. Let's have a listen.
And I think it's going very well.
But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue. What he was so bad.
Right. Biden bad, yeah, kind of agree with that. Could there have been a deal at the very beginning? Probably not, unless there'd been a very forceful America and, you know, a Europe that actually had some semblance of an idea what it should do and not be divided on this. And, you know, Germany, they're so weak, you know, snuggling up to Russia all the time. But started it. That alarms me because, you know, regardless of what people might say was provocation, well, you know, Ukraine was talking to the EU a bit, it was beginning to westernize. Well, that's angered Donald Trump. Well, the thoughts that Ukraine might be in NATO, that's not angered Donald Trump, angered Vladimir Putin. These are very Kremlin-esque lines. But started it. I'm sorry, was it not Russian tanks that went into Ukraine? I like Donald Trump so much, but I cannot square that circle. And it's kind of upset me this morning. Not upset me in a, well, there you go, we've already said he's close to Russia and you've been proven wrong. Nothing's proven wrong yet until we see what the deal looks like. But I don't know. Let me know what you think. But I'm it has alarmed me. I must admit that has sort of put a little chill down my spine because the thing is with Russia, they have been appeased constantly. They were appeased, weren't they, in 2014 when they decided to invade the Kremlin and I'm all over the place this morning. Crimea, excuse me, I've been up since 6 a.m. doing things and I've forgotten how to string a sentence together. They were appeased in 2014 when they went into Crimea and, you know, essentially Obama said, here you go, get on with it, have that, as did the EU leaders. And then they were able to sit at the big boys' table and everyone's buying their gas, and so they went into Ukraine. And people have always said, well, you know, the thing is with Putin, you let him get away with stuff and he'll take another bite and another bite and another bite. And I'm beginning to think, well, yes, that's possible. But especially under this scenario, if America backs right off and blames everything on Ukraine, then Putin's literally rubbing his hands together in glee. And where next? And what does that mean for us? Again, let's see how this all plays out. I think a lot of people are able to get through to Donald Trump. He's someone who learns a lot through conversation and people sitting around and saying, well, have you seen it from this perspective? Have you seen it from that perspective? And I don't think he's also, a man who wouldn't turn around and change his mind and say, well, you know, Putin's now done this and I'm going to turn against him. But that is worrying. That is worrying. 03444 99 1000 is the number to call if you want to let me know your thoughts on that. Really difficult when you're a Trumpist and sort of very pro-MAGA like I am and love everything else he's doing to then go, oh, God, please don't get this wrong. It's so important. You can WhatsApp me as well on that number. 03444 99 1000 is the number. And you can send me a voice note on WhatsApp should you so wish. 8722 is the text number. Remember to write the word talk before your message. That way it pings the aerials on top of Talk Towers, and we're on X at talkTV. Also today, UK inflation rises to a 10-month high of 3% in January. Is that a surprise? No. Is that worrying? Yes, it is. Is that going to continue going up? I'd say without doubt it is. What does that mean for us? Well, it just means everything's going to be more expensive. The food you buy, the fuel you put in your car, the interest on your mortgage. This is largely going to be super boosted, of course, as well, by that increase in employers' national insurance. Because if they're having to pay more to employ people and they need to retain those staff, those prices have to be passed down to the consumer. So food prices are going to go up. At the same time, food prices will go up because farmers will be producing less food, as this government seems to insist they should sell off swathes of land for solar panel farms, and they should, give more money to HMRC with inheritance tax. So that's going to go up. Instability. Well, let's see what goes on with the cost of fuel and gas, because that affects wholesale energy prices. let's say drill baby drill kicks in, that could help us significantly. But if there continues to be instability in Russia, in Ukraine, of course, in the Middle East, that's not going to change either. And with the government's mad drive towards net zero and the extra tariffs being put on energy bills for the green products, which again is passed on to businesses, which then put the price, that cost down onto prices. I mean, everywhere you look, things are just going to get worse. And on top of that, we've now got the absolute audacity of a judge, Lady Chief Justice Carr, who's some kind of, top wig, a big wig in the judicial system, saying that free speech on the floor of Parliament needs to be restrained because both parties disagreed, the Conservatives and the Labour Party disagreed with the judge's ruling when a Gazan family used the Ukrainian refugee resettlement scheme to claim right to remain in the UK. The clue's in the title. That scheme was for Ukrainians. And we can't just allow anybody from Gaza to come along and say, I'm a refugee. Yeah, we know your country's a mess. We know it's been rubberized. That's because you're infiltrated by some of the worst, most inhumane, barbaric terrorists and extremists the world has ever known. So how do we know whether you're Hamas affiliated or not when so much of the population is Hamas at least sympathetic? I think it'd be a disaster to open the floodgates to people from that region. Without doubt, other nations in that region should be doing more to help. So I think a very open and honest exchange in Parliament, calling into question that ruling. But no, can't question the judges. The judges are above the law. They make the law. They're totally independent, and the independence of the judiciary is important. Great, it would be if we lived in a mad banana republic. But the problem is, these independent judges seem to be the mad ones themselves. They are the crazy ones. They are the sort of fascistic ones who are happy to chuck people in prison for social media posts and have it all televised. They seem to be happy to just run roughshod over the sovereignty of Parliament's rights to come up with immigration policy, therefore democracy. And if you want to know how conceited, how deluded, how power hungry, how megalomaniacal, how arrogant that these people are, Lady Chief Justice Carr doesn't just want politicians to keep the names of judges and the rulings of judges out of their mouths, suppressing criticism on the judicial system. She also wants some sort of special judicial protection service. She wants judges of the land to have security guards and, I don't know, the cavalcades of vehicles with flashing lights and armed police and probably in smart little suits. I mean, I'm sorry, when's the last time there was a news story about a judge being attacked? Has there been one? Have we got any evidence that there are attacks on the judicial system, justices themselves? Why do they need us, the taxpayer, to pay for them to have some sort of mad protection scheme? These people earn so much money. They live in the poshest, leafiest parts of the suburbs of the cities in massive houses. They can afford their own protection. They're not getting on the tube every day like the rest of us, hanging like lemurs off the poles inside a carriage, getting leered at, jabbed, pushed and shoved. No, they're not living on the mean streets of, the poorer districts of London where you probably get stabbed going out to buy a pint of milk. And yet they want us to pay for them to have some form of protection. I mean, it's just mad. What do they think they are? They think they're above politicians. They think they're above the royal family. They think they are the rulers of the universe. And frankly, we've given them too much bandwidth to act that way. So do you know what, Lady Chief Justice Carr? You can do one, because I'm going to criticise you very openly. I'm going to criticise the judiciary very openly, because it's people like you and the rulings of the judges that you all hang out with which are ruining this country. Let me be very clear about that. And then this is weird as well. So, dubbed Britain's worst courier, the delivery company Every has admitted it will probably lose about 8 million packages this year. What? 8 million packages, despite being only 2 months in. That's 22,000 parcels every day. Some will eventually make their way to their rightful owners after a delay, but others will never arrive due to being stolen or damaged. Now, you can't really blame if they've been stolen, can you? Because, I mean, the problem is now you've got these delivery people, they come along, unless you've got your safe space, some people have to wait for you to be in, you miss them out 3-4 times in a row, and then you're sort of playing ping pong with trying to get that thing redelivered at a time when you're actually in the house. And the thing is, they always do their deliveries between like 10 a.m. and 4 p.m, the times when nobody's in their house, and they give you this window so blimmin' wide. You're like, what, am I now under house arrest because I want a new pair of oven gloves? And so a lot of parcel companies then say, well, what are we supposed to do if you haven't made the provisions for us to put it somewhere safe? We'll just leave it on your doorstep. And, you know, criminals know that that's the case. They go on a nick. Certainly on my street, we've got a little street WhatsApp group. People are always getting their parcels nicked. Always having their things robbed. Funny story, the other day, someone actually had their parcel put inside their recycling bin because I think the delivery company thought, well, this will be safe, at least it's concealed. They didn't realise it was recycling day. So unfortunately, that particular parcel also disappeared. But there you go. Every admitting it's going to lose 22,000 UK parcels every single day. Are they trying to collapse their share price as well? I mean, I just don't really understand why they've decided to come out and announce this like it's a great life achievement. Let me know your thoughts on all of that. The number is 0344 499 1000. Going to take a short break now, but looking forward to catching up with you after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back. So I kind of couldn't get a sentence together earlier for some reason. I seem to have lost the ability to articulate. But at least I was in a cheerful mood. That was until the arrival of Benedict Spence, who has come in like a little ball of thunder.
Yeah.
Good morning to you. That is what the Tube does to you.
Assalamu alaikum.
That is what the Tube does to you. And I know it. We were just doing the advert break. He was just like, I'm leaving. I can't do this anymore. I'm getting out of London. What is the point? I've had so many days.
I've had enough. I've had nothing. Days you set off early, somebody pulls an alarm, somebody jumps in front of a train, somebody moves between, they mess about, all that sort of thing.
Well, we come
Days
from
you set
we come
off
from the
late,
same part of London, don't we, essentially? A similar part of London where we have to cross London. And so it's literally like tombola. Sometimes you get on the tube and there's no one on it because everyone's working from home. And you're like, oh, my God, I actually get to sit down. Other days, they're pushing you in like sardines. You can't even move down the platform. Someone's bag gets stuck in a door.
And there are going to be people,
on and on and on.
Lots of people
and
are
you
listening.
Can't predict it.
Lots of people are listening to this who don't live in London, and they'll be thinking, oh, well, that's all very well for you. But at the very least, the cost of living is lower in other parts of the country that you don't feel like you can't feel TfL physically reaching into your wallet and taking your money out. And it might be TfL, but it might just be somebody doing that, because that's now a thing. Since when did that become a thing again?
My rental price has gone up. It's doubled in 4 years. Doubled in 4 years.
Unbelievable.
And this is the thing. I know so many people moving out of London now, me included. I'm getting out.
Yeah.
I hate it. You know, you can't afford to live here.
No, you can't.
And then you're likely to be stabbed on your way trying to buy something in a shop, or, you know, harassed by a man.
People think that, you know, we're egging this. Like, how many times you've been the victim of a phone theft? How many times have you also seen it happening?
Oh,
you witness it every week.
On the main road near where I live, where you've got a load of little grocery stores, where I used to just wander into, they're all boarded up.
Oh, yeah,
you
people
have to now go
come in
into
and steal.
in and out of the same entrance because of the level of looting.
Yeah.
And it's, you stand in there every day looting.
You see this regularly. People just go in and they take it.
And they take it and then barge past you, elbow into you. It's a nightmare. It's awful. And, you know, it ties into the story that I was talking about just before you came in, which is Every admits it will lose 22,000 UK parcels every day, which is, well, it's a lot, basically. 8 million a year.
Where does it go?
And, well, I'll tell you where it goes.
The Bermuda Triangle, where does it go?
They get nicked.
Yeah.
The level of just theft at the moment in London, the level of theft, harassment, violence, I mean, I used to live in various parts of Africa. I mean, we're like Mogadishu now in some parts of London. It's just lawless.
Well, at least there was swift justice in Mogadishu.
And it costs you Brazilian pounds to live here. And yeah, I'm with you. So there you go. That is why Benedict is annoyed today, and I share in his pain. Right, let's speak to William, who's in, the beautiful leafy Tunbridge Wells. Hiya, William. Has levels of lawlessness gone up in Tunbridge Wells? Are you still immune from it?
Oh, we're not too bad in Tunbridge Wells. It's not good, but it's not. We can't complain really. It's nowhere like London.
Good, yeah.
London, meet family from the north. We don't bother anymore. It's marches and idiocy everywhere you go in there, and just don't feel safe.
No, well, you're not safe.
Really phoning up was I just can't believe President Trumpsky siding with Putin and saying that Ukraine started the war. Every day something unbelievable comes out into the news.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. So, you know, I'm glad Benedict's here because he's always my anchor. He's my port in a storm where I get confused about what I should think on situations. And so, Benedict, you know, I was saying earlier that I'm a big fan of Trump. I love a bit of Trump. I was over for inauguration, wearing my MAGA hat. I think a lot of what's going on in America is so important and sets political cover for Europe to follow suit. When J.D. Vance pointed his finger at Europe at that Munich Security Conference and said, actually, I'm more worried about you guys and the way you're governing your own countries, I was like, yes, son, that needed to be said. And the fallout from that was exactly what you'd expect. What a grown man crying and everyone applauding it, and then everyone else rolling their eyes and going, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
But equal gender representation at the Munich Security Conference, that was something that the crying man actually brought up as something to look forward to.
He was wearing a Nehru shirt. You're like, you already know.
No, that's a traditional sort of Alpine German thing.
Oh, was it? Yes. I thought it was like one of those
I'm not sure how the two have become a thing, but no, that's actually what they do wear. Along that, you can find those things in some of the finer tailoring establishments in London. It's a bit trendy these days. Not that you'll catch me wearing that.
But let's go back to this, because when people are saying Trump's going to talk to Putin, I was like, good, someone's got to move things along and speak to the man. It's the only way to do it. Also, a lot of the Europeans going, wow, Ukraine should be in NATO. I'm like, that's going to be a Russian red line. So it's for the birds if you think Russia's going to sign off on a deal that looks like that.
Of course, it was nonsense when Starmer was saying, I'm committing to putting British peacekeepers in Ukraine, because that's a surefire way of making sure that there is no peace to keep.
Right.
Because they'll just say, absolutely not.
Right. And I've always said that Europe has to be circumspect about what it was trying to do in Ukraine before Maidan, flooding the country with propaganda, come and join the EU, making this very clear. The CIA were all part of that. They were using Ukraine as a proxy battle between the West and Russia, right?
colour revolution, that sort of thing. It's a tried and tested playbook. And there's no, even though obviously Russia are the ones that started the military campaign, no question about that. Yeah. The red lines that had been established between Russia and the West over the future of Ukraine, let's be very clear, they were up to all sorts of things to try.
Disarm yourselves of nuclear weapons. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're not going to expand NATO.
And it's not just because the West are really nice people, you know? It's because Ukraine has an awful lot in the way of raw mineral resources, uranium production. It is an important country for food and for fertilizers. There is a reason that both Russia and Europe and the United States want it. And a large part of this attempt now to get a peace is so that Trump feels, at the very least, that perhaps not the West, but certainly the United States, will at least get a portion of that wealth. It's the same thing with what he's doing with Canada, with Denmark and with Greenland. It's all about the attempt to acquire natural resources, which is, of course...
To push back against China.
Which is exactly what Russia has also been doing, again, to push back against China. As you pointed out, in Sahel, across the world, that's what all of Wagner's expeditions are up to. It's about trying to secure natural resources, mineral wealth, for the future in a multipolar world, where it's basically Russia trying to compete with the United States and China.
But what William said is, I agree with William, which is, I get all the strategy behind it. I really do, more than anybody. Well, not more than anyone, that's an exaggeration. But I really do get the strategy behind it. More than most, let's say. More than if you take the whole global population.
You in the war room, I guess, more than anybody.
Alex with her satellites on top of her house. No, I do understand all the nuances, which, you know, we get sold things in such stupid tropes. And then when someone, I remember when Nigel Farage turned around and said, well, you know, there's a point, there's a good point to make about NATO expansionism and Putin saying he doesn't like that ages ago. Yeah. But what Trump has said today, can we roll the clip actually? Because that would be really useful to listen to that. Let's have a listen to what he actually said.
And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue. What he was so bad.
Well, I think we can agree with that. I mean, the thing is with Donald Trump, he speaks in such simple terms and sort of never speaks in nuance. Yeah. But there does seem to me it is beginning to nudge up against blame Ukraine for everything. There hasn't, if that had been counterbalanced by saying in Putin is this because you think there's a sort of a tactic going on where he wants to, you know, stroke Putin's ego, thinking this is the best way to go about doing things? But he'll have his own agenda to put the squeeze on Russia, to contain Russia. I mean, is he taking Russia's side?
I don't think he's taking Russia's side, no. I think that this is about trying to bring the thing to as clean an end as possible. And the thing is, the Ukrainians are obviously their own actors in this. They can decide actually to ignore what the United States says, and indeed what Russia demands. The outcome of that will be very bad for everybody. You know, if Ukraine, as Ukraine has sort of hinted in the past, it might go down the route of actually trying to acquire nuclear weapons with or without the assistance of the United States. You know, these things are increasingly easy to do, and it would be a way, I suppose, of putting Russia on notice, but that would likely escalate the conflict. But it could do that if it wanted to, and that's something that it's been threatening to do. It's also threatened to attack Russia's oil infrastructure directly, which again would damage Ukraine, but it would damage the West an awful lot as well. That's something that they want to avoid. But it is, if you pardon the pun, the questions of, do we try to hit the nuclear button to really ratchet up the tension in the interests of trying to maintain our own sovereignty, our own freedom? Because let's be very clear, any peace that's imposed on Ukraine is going to be... It's going to be incredibly painful for them to take from both sides. They will lose territory to the Russians. They will become a client state of the US, unless, of course, the US decides to turn around to the Europeans and go, well, this is your mess, you can have this, which they might do.
If Putin gets what he wants right now, the east of the country, there's a lot of mineral wealth there, and if he gets that coastline and essentially is able to control the Black Sea,
Well,
We're in trouble.
That's why Ukraine
We're
wants.
in big
that's
trouble.
why Ukraine wants Turkey to be part of this conversation, because
No,
Turkey is
they have a
actually
meeting, Turkey,
on the subject of autocratic individuals who have territorial expansionist ideas. Turkey is just one of those powers, and actually has quite a good track record of shooting down Russian planes and Russia not doing anything about it, because it's not an insignificant military power. So that's why they want them involved in the conversation, not just the United States. They want somebody else with skin in the game. But the reality is, as things currently stand, Ukraine isn't going to get that territory back. Russia's got it. It's too strong, realistically, to lose it on the battlefield. It's not going to give these things up as part of a negotiation unless it's offered something unexpected. And the thing is, there was a window. Let's be very clear about this. There was a window in which Western countries could have helped Ukraine to push the Russians back. Probably would have done it very successfully. And they fumbled it so badly.
They didn't put strong enough sanctions on. Even now, Germany...
Well, I wouldn't even say the sanctions. I think the sanctions have always been a bit of a misnomer, because other countries were always going to go, you can do business. You know, India has done very well out of sanctions on Russia. Kazakhstan has done fantastically. China has made a lot of money. Iran has done fantastically out of this. All the countries that you wouldn't want, really, are having a great old time because of these sanctions. Actually, it was about giving them the equipment in the first place, whilst they had the manpower, and go use it on Russian territory. Push them back, hit them hard.
But they're
and don't worry.
You can't provoke Putin.
Well, exactly, you can't do that. Even though
the Germans saying, don't use our weapons.
Even though, of course, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, when he saw a Russian plane in his airspace, just went bang, okay, down it goes, and the Russians did not, in fact, launch World War III. They went,
and also what we have
serious.
seen, actually, if Russia was as big and mighty military as it says it is, it wouldn't have made this wouldn't have become a war of attrition.
Exactly. There was, as I say, there was a window, but this is why now you've got the Europeans wringing their hands going, oh no, isn't it terrible that the Americans are pulling the funding? Are you going to do it yourselves? Nah, probably not.
Well, basically, everyone, it is a screaming mess, and Lord knows where we go from here. We live in very precarious times indeed. We're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we're going to be focusing our attention on domestic politics and speaking to a former Labour spad.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Let's talk politics now. Let's talk UK politics. And we're joined now by Paul Richards, former Labour Special Advisor. Paul, I want to start off talking about this story about Lady Chief Justice Carr. Basically saying that the exchange between Sir Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch, where they both, frankly, criticised a judge's ruling saying that a Gazan family could use the Ukrainian scheme to settle here, and said, look, you know, Parliament is sovereign and should be able to make immigration policy. Well, now this judge, this Lady Chief Justice Carr, seems to be saying, you can't criticise us, that's really dangerous, and also demanding that judges get some sort of special protection service. I mean, is she mad?
I don't think it's dangerous at all to criticise the judiciary, because we live in a country which is supposed to be a democracy, and that means Parliament comes first, doesn't it? I mean, that's the point that both leaders of the main parties were making, which was that actually, if the law is interpreted in a way which is counter to what was intended, and in this case, clearly, Gazans using a Ukrainian scheme is, then politicians that we elect have the right to say so. That's all that was about. And I think, most people would side with the politicians against the judges on that one.
Apart from the judges, who seem to increasingly think in this country that they are the people who are in charge, that they are above Parliament, they make the law, they interpret the law, and therefore their independence, I was saying earlier, the independence of the judiciary now seems to be unaccountability. And increasingly we're seeing the application of whether it be ECHR law, human rights law, essentially appearing to be absolutely farcical, anti-democratic. It goes against the will of the people, of what they would want to see happen in their country. It goes against the spirit of multiple manifestos from multiple parties. But in Kyrgyzstan, we've got somebody who always says, we follow the law, we obey international law, who never likes to sort of upset the apple cart when it comes to challenging the judicial system because he is from it. So is he going to be the one to be able to contain this ever megalomaniacal, class of people who seem to be riding roughshod over democracy at the moment?
Well, it might be his Nixon goes to China moment in that he was the head of the legal profession and obviously an eminent, prominent lawyer himself. But he is now our prime minister, and perhaps he is the person who can take on the legal blob and actually shake it up a bit and reinstate the idea of us being a parliamentary democracy where elections matter and who gets elected should have a say on our behalf. The people, and that sort of basic constitutional balance, I think, is one that he would uphold more than anything else. And don't forget, he left the legal world in order to become a politician. He sort of gambled his entire career on becoming an MP and then standing for the leadership of the Labour Party and then becoming Prime Minister. And he could have just had a probably quite quiet life, making a lot of money in the law if he had so chosen. So he does believe in democracy and he does believe in the primacy of Parliament, which is the key thing here. So, I forget who it was, Alex, you might remember, who said, well, if that's the law, then the law is an ass. And in this case, that is plainly true. Yeah, I mean, I'd say I'd add to that as well. If anybody can actually take on this issue, it is Keir Starmer, because if it happened to be a Conservative politician or someone who wasn't originally from the judiciary, the howls of this is a tyranny, this is a government trying to turn into an authoritarian state would be very, very, extremely loud. Whereas actually, if Keir Starmer himself tried to do this, he might kind of get away with it, although a lot of people sometimes think that he is slightly tyrannical. Now, let's talk about a story here where migrant children who have crossed the Channel alone are now appealing for their parents to want asylum as well. And of course, under the ECHR, you can see that being imposed. You can see that you've got these two minors who are there and they want mummy and daddy, so family life and all the rest of it, they better go as well. But the problem with this, there is a big risk here that in order to then get into the country, people could essentially use their kids as canaries in the mine. It would again set a very dangerous precedent for people smugglers, and also false claims of who relatives might be and so on and so forth. How should we now approach this subject? Well, it's really tricky, isn't it? Because it is heartbreaking, the idea that a family is split up in this way. These poor little children, through no fault of their own, find themselves on a boat and then in this country without their parents. But I think the bottom line to this is that anything that serves as an incentive, whether it's the promise of citizenship or the idea that your family will be reunited or whatever it might be, needs to be looked very closely at, even stopped. The whole point of saying that if you come here on a dangerous crossing, you're not going to get automatic British citizenship is about saying that we can remove as many incentives as possible for people to get on the boats in the first place, alongside the action which is being taken to deport people who are here illegally, and also to invest in smashing the gangs so that no boats are even put on the waters in the first place. And that means, disrupting the supply chain and removing their phones. And each time a minister announces one of these things, everyone goes, oh, well, that won't do it. But it is the accumulation of all these different levers, which we hope will then reduce the numbers of crossings by disrupting the gangs. Now, if there was a single, simple one thing that you could do, a single club approach, any government would have done it. Right?
Do you not actually think there's the basic optics of just turning a boat around and sending it back to France, even if it has to be dragged there, was a single simple thing which no one's tried to do?
I've heard the argument, just to put the Royal Navy into the Channel, and somehow that would do it. The Channel is enormous, and the idea that you could just put a few naval warships there and somehow they would be able to do this, again, if that was possible, we'd have done it.
Hold on. I hear that, but if the RNLI magically can somehow manage to leave ports in Kent and find these dinghies at sea and then bring them in this direction, arguably a Navy vessel, just like the RNLI, could magically find these dinghies at sea and send them back in that direction. I just don't understand why we're not doing that.
My understanding is that the RNLI don't intervene in the majority of these cases, and the problem, they do it when people are in their genuine
right, but if they can find a boat, what I'm saying is these boats, there must be enough of them that are traceable, because if the RNLI can find them, we've seen people being pulled out of these dinghies and then being brought to the UK. So if these boats can at times be found, and I do agree that it's not all of them, a lot just, make their way across the channel untraced.
I fear. The problem is most of them do land on British soil.
So why can't we? But that's still not answering my question. It's not a huge expanse of ocean, right? It's not a huge expanse. Not even an ocean. It's not a huge expanse of sea.
Alex, it's vast. I live in it. I'm here by the seaside right now. It's enormous.
No, but the crossing point on a good day, you can see France. I've been down there. I know it. We're not talking about trying to find a needle in a haystack, a missing boat in the middle of the Pacific. And as I said, RNLI are able to go and find those boats in distress. I'm pretty sure that if one or two boats could be tracked and intercepted and taken back to France, the optics of that, yes, Macron might get upset by it, but surely the optics of that sends a very clear message. France, we're giving you money to make sure these people don't get hit and you're not doing it, so we're going to return these people. And it says to the people traffickers, we mean business.
Well, I don't think it would, because I think they'll just find a way around it. And the solution is not once the boats are on the water. The solution has to be stopping the boats getting anywhere near the water. Stop the gangs from exploiting.
But that's out of our hands, isn't it? We've given France all the money in the world to try and do that, and they're failing to, or not willing to.
Yvette Cooper has talked very strongly about a sort of a security approach to this, and using our intelligence forces and the police and everybody else. And I think that's the right approach, really, because you have to choke off the supply, even to the extent of, sequestrating the boats in Europe before they get anywhere near the French side or the Belgian side of the channel.
But again, these aren't our authorities. All we can do is offer some support and some money, but we depend on other people. We depend on Germany, who have a rule you're not allowed to apply surveillance.
This may be anathema, but we need to work closely with our European allies, don't we? That's the solution.
And, of course we do. But the thing is, like I said, when you've
closer collaboration with France and Belgium.
When you've got, Belgium actually do a half-decent job in intercepting stuff, but when you've got a country like Germany whose rules are you're not allowed to use surveillance, then how are you going to find out where? This is why all of the dinghies are being sent to Germany, stored in massive warehouses in Germany and sent on, because Germany's not allowed to track them. Anyway, let's move on to a different topic, because this one, you can sort of go around the houses all the time with this argument. I still think big, decisive, bold action would just save a lot of lives in the long run, but everyone's a bit too lily-livered to do anything like that. Let's talk now about net zero, because there were lots of videos and repeated promises from Sir Keir Starmer ahead of the election campaign that in no way are energy bills going to go up, and that he's going to make sure that doesn't happen, no more subsidies, And yet we now know that Britain's push towards net zero will push energy bills higher. Ed Miliband's officials have admitted in an apparent contradiction of the Energy Secretary's own claims. And this is, of course, the cost of rolling out wind farms, solar farms, other renewable power schemes are going to inflate prices, apparently in the short to medium term. We're not really told how long that term is. Of course, this mad rush to net zero was eventually going to, not eventually, but was always going to cost the ordinary person, because money doesn't grow on trees. Why were we lied to?
First of all, there seems to be a real pushback going on in some bits of the political jungle that climate change is even real. And I mean, I think the first thing to say is that climate change, man-made climate change, is a genuine scientific fact. And so the question then is, what do you do about it? Well, you could say we do nothing about it because China emits loads of emissions, or there's not much we as a small country can do. Or you can say what Labour's saying, which is that we should do something about it, but let's turn it into an opportunity, and actually let's invest in some of these technologies like carbon capture and solar and wind powers and so on, manufacture this stuff in this country, get the apprenticeships.
But we're not manufacturing it in this country, are we? That's the problem.
The problem is that, and I don't want to be buying it from
And how
Norway.
are we going to manufacture it? So don't we end up in a bit of a sticky situation? Because the people manufacturing this stuff, by and large, is China, who are whacking up a load of coal-fired power stations. That's what they're helping. That's what they're using with their lower energy prices to manufacture this stuff. So it's almost as if the sensible approach would be, right, let's just not bother with net zero for a couple of years while we make all these solar panels and wind farms and then do it. You can't have these things running in tandem. You can't have manufacturing and net zero absolutism.
I disagree. I think you can start investing in this country and tip the balance back to British manufacturing, and with all the jobs and apprenticeships that goes with that. But doing nothing is not really an option because the threat is real. And I think also there's whole sections of the economy, particularly steel and engineering and so on, which needs this boost of green jobs. So it's not a drain on resources. It's a way of generating growth as well as tackling the elephant in the room. And I just think it's, the discourse that says, oh, well, let's do nothing. We could be world leaders in this stuff. People could be buying this stuff from us in 10 years' time if we invest now.
Maybe,
and alongside nuclear power stations and all the other things as well.
Perhaps if we actually, in the short term, harness the fossil fuels we do have rather than having to continuously import them, given that on most days, 75% of the grid is coming from gas. Maybe if we used our own in the short-term period and then use that to invest back into making renewables, I would agree with you. But it seems to me, like I said, we're cutting off our own power source, buying it from elsewhere and handing those jobs to China.
This is a country where most of the time we have howling gales. We don't have too much sunshine, but we have plenty of wind power, for example, and then we have a lot of coastline. So the idea that that's our natural resource, that's the power source.
Right, but most of them, but when you look at the makeup of the grid, in fact, Benedict, can you tell me what it is right now? Because you can actually go on websites and find out how much wind is blowing and how much of it gas is being used. But for the most time, it's the opposite, isn't it? The wind ain't blowing, and everything else is having to be used to prop up the grid.
Depends where you live, I think. But to be honest, I don't want to be reliant on Putin for our gas anymore, because I think that now seems like a.
So why can't we be reliant on ourselves? Because if it's not Putin, it's Qatar, or it's Norway, or it's America. We've got our own. Listen, Paul.
This is the argument I'm making. Let's do it here. Let's get the jobs here. Let's technology here.
That means drilling in the North Sea, doesn't it?
Let's be ambitious. Let's be ambitious.
It means in the short term, at least as a transition, using our own fossil fuels. Right, listen, Paul, thank you ever so much. We're going to have to take a short break now, but when we come back, we're going to be talking about the BBC has been accused of using a Hamas official's son in a documentary about ordinary Palestinians. Yes, of course they have. Right, we're back after this.
could, they would do another 7th of October. So, I guess that the world is realizing what we have been fighting for the last 16 months.
Right. And so this is generally being called phase 2, right, of the hostage release?
We're still in phase 1.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But phase 2 is about to be negotiated or about to start again soon?
Yes, so there are negotiations about phase 2. Israel clearly wants all of the hostages back. Right. We have still about, as of now, we still have 73 hostages, but we will still have about 60 plus hostages.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, Benedict and I did manage to find that energy dashboard, and today, as we speak, as of 10:45 today, you've got a total of about 43% coming from gas, 43% of our energy grid. Today, the wind is blowing a bit more than normal, because sometimes wind's basically at zero. So there's a bit of output today, so I'm almost glad we didn't manage to get it up early. But actually, the wind's doing okay.
It's still more gas, isn't it?
Significantly more gas. It's significantly more gas. It's almost 50% of the grid is gas.
Yeah, and you're not getting rid of that. And the thing is, saying, oh, I don't want Putin deciding what my energy policy is. There's great news. The UK is literally floating in a sea of oil and gas, which it's choosing not to drill.
Putin is deciding what your energy policy is.
If you don't drill your own energy.
If you don't drill your own energy, because he's, with OPEC nations deciding how much the blimmin' energy costs, increasing inflation. Right, let's move on to something totally different, although not different in theme to stuff we've heard time and again. I didn't watch this. I saw it pop up on my TV guide the other day, Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone, on the BBC. And I was sort of slightly tempted to watch it, because apparently it's sort of young people who have been filming what it's like in Gaza and then passing it on to other journalists, because they're not allowed inside Gaza, to show the world what the reality of life inside Gaza is. And I thought, well, OK, that would be an interesting watch. But at the last minute, I was like, do you know what? It's BBC. I just don't trust this. I'm not going to bother. And so I did not. And here we go. Quelle surprise. The BBC has been accused of focusing a documentary about ordinary Palestinians on the son of a Hamas government minister and didn't disclose the connection. This is because, and I hate to say it, not majority, but a vast number of people in Gaza are connected to Hamas. They are. Right, let's now speak to David Collier, who's an investigative journalist, to tell us more. I mean, this is the thing when it comes to Gaza, separating those people who have connections to Hamas, who work for Hamas, who support Hamas from, ordinary citizens who are none of those things is vanishingly small, really, isn't it?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me on, Alex. All you have to do is 16 months now into the conflict. There are apparently thousands of journalists working in Gaza. Not a single one of them has sent an image of a hostage or done any scoop of hostages or anything that Hamas wouldn't want people to know. And the truth is they have total editorial control over everything that comes out of the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. People always suggest there's Israel blocking people from being in Gaza and reporting out of Gaza. The idea of allowed journalists in to look at tunnels. But you're right, Hamas do have total editorial control, and the BBC fall for it every time. You get the impression it's because the BBC are very sympathetic to Hamas. But what do we do about this? Because it seems to me that, that the BBC will sort of jump over themselves to make these sorts of documentaries and aren't applying the right checks and balances.
Yeah, well, firstly, you're absolutely right. The situation's disgraceful. They effectively gave Hamas an hour promo the other night. That's what they did. I mean, if it's controlled by the Hamas minister, I mean, they obviously have their input. If we're only seeing what they want us to see, and the whole thing is about, we had the family of Hamas walking around trying to get sympathy for their situation in a situation about a war they started. It was absolutely sickening to watch.
Well, yeah, that narrative has well been lost in the wash, hasn't it? The idea that now it's all the focus is on Israel or the bad guys doing X, Y and Z. And you're right. Where have been the long interviews with the hostages of what it was like being held in captivity, what it was like when they were plucked out of their safe houses in their kibbutz, or snatched out of a music festival, watching their friends being gunned down, dragged off on the back of motorways, many of the women no doubt assaulted in ways that's unimaginable. The 3 hostages who came out who said, I was hung upside down by my ankles, I was deprived of food. Why are the BBC not reporting on the fact that that mother and those two wee ginger-haired kids clearly have been slain by this evil organisation? Where is all of this stuff? Why is it constantly a bleeding heart effort to try and portray an area of the Middle East which is dominated by extremists of the worst possible kind as the victim all the time?
Look, absolutely. I don't need convincing. And the thing is, everything I found was there in open source. If the BBC had wanted to know about these connections, they could have just looked and they would have found them as I did. The truth is, they're not interested. They're not interested in the truth, or they don't seem to be. They want to push this narrative. They're looking for the sympathy. They're trying to demonize Israel. And of course, that affects people like me, because I'm Jewish in the country and I see the situation here deteriorating because our state broadcaster is helping spread anti-Semitism in this country.
Yeah, but I'm going to bring you into this because this has been the problem since the outbreak of this war. And, you know, people underestimate how sophisticated in many respects the international Islamist community are at dominating media and finding themselves in positions of influence, creating a web, using the output of information, whether it's sort of, you know, aligned mouthpieces such as Al Jazeera or through journalists. They're very good, aren't they, Benedict, of creating networks to influence the information game and use that as international propaganda.
They are. I think a lot of that comes down to two things, though. I think, one, there is sort of institutional scepticism of Israel in a lot of mainstream news organisations around the world. We don't necessarily need to go into the reasons why that is. We all know. We just have to accept that that's what it is. I also think, though, that there's a lot of laziness on the part of a lot of Western journalists these days. And I don't mean here Western journalists who go in as war correspondents and the like. I mean people in newsrooms, you know, sat safely in their home countries, whose job it is basically to create content and to churn that out. They'll take content wherever they can get it. So if people masquerading as, you know, independent journalists in Gaza come out and say, well, we can do X, Y, Z, I think that there's a level of... There's a lack of critical focus on that. People are more inclined to just go, yes, fantastic, and take it almost at its own word. And that's how Hamas, I think, is able to get out so much favourable propaganda, in the sense that, you know, that on the one hand there has to be absolute scepticism about everything Israel does from Western newsrooms, whereas almost these sort of plucky do-it-yourself journalists fighting against the odds, well, they couldn't possibly be up to anything bad, could they? So let's just put it out there.
One thing I want to ask you, David, because I felt for a long time, when it comes to the sort of the space of investigative journalism, which plays such an important role in speaking truth to power and uncovering things that the public deserve to know about, it's a space constantly dominated by the left wing. I can't think of many sort of right-leaning investigative programmes or outputters. And the difficulty here, of course, is when you look at it through that prism, where are the people who are putting secret cameras on the 14-year-old girls in Rochester to be able to demonstrate that, you know, these rape gangs are still doing what they do? You know, where are the investigations into some of these other horror stories we're hearing that are in theory are too taboo or we're not allowed to talk about? That's exactly where investigative journalists should be going.
Yeah, look, for sure. I mean, firstly, this is a key point. A couple of things have been mentioned. I mean, we're talking about state broadcasters, the BBC, who, when you're in a position where you use Al Jazeera as a recruiting pool, you're in trouble. And this has been a gradual decay that we've been watching over the last few decades of this slow corruption from within of our mainstream organisations. I would not get an interview with BBC. They wouldn't interview me. They have no problem bringing on the Islamists or hard left activists who will sit there and spout the most awful propaganda. There is an imbalance from the start, and it's across the entire network.
I agree. Couldn't agree more. David Colley, investigative journalist, thank you ever so much. Now let's read what the BBC have to say about this. A BBC spokesman said, Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone, a documentary showing the conflict through the eyes of 3 children in Gaza, was produced in line with BBC editorial guidelines, and the BBC had full editorial control. The film told the children's own stories, showing viewers their direct experiences of living through a war, and the children's parents did not have any editorial input. How did you guarantee that then, if you weren't there? And you know for sure the parents didn't say anything to those kids? As the BBC has previously explained, the film was edited and directed from London. Directed from London? What are they doing? Setting up some sort of cameras on drones? As independent international journalists are not allowed into Gaza. Ah, yes, that word independent. The film gives audiences a rare glimpse of Gaza during the war, as well as an insight into the children's lives. It hears the voices of other Gazan civilians, several of whom voice anti-Hamas sentiments. Oh, that's right, several of whom, but it kind of proves the point, doesn't it, that a lot of people there are actually pro-Hamas, aren't they? And that, at the end of the day, is the bit that the BBC seem to constantly forget about.
Yeah, and I think it's also sort of missing the point that one of the major themes about life as being a child in Gaza is being indoctrinated to become anti-Semitic. You know, Israel doesn't have Israel doesn't have to forge the propaganda. It's right there at all of the schools, many of which are funded by the UN, in the textbooks. A lot of stuff talking about how bad them Jews are and how good it is to martyr yourself in the goal of defeating them. So as much as we can say, oh, they're just innocent children, there is a long indoctrination factory in Gaza that has been going on for a very long time.
And you know
have to take into account.
Very often with editorial policy, it's not about what you show, it's about the stuff that is not being shown. OK, we're going to take a short break now, but don't go anywhere because we're going to continue giving all the updates on today's headlines and news from here and around the world. Back in just a moment.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time.
Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. Shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, Oivamo slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
welcome back to the show. Delighted to have you. Join me today, Alex Phillips, sitting in for Julia Hartley-Brewer from 10 until 1, with you all week during that time slot. So, do stay tuned in. We've got some breaking news first, and then we're going to read some messages, and then we're going to mop up on that before we head into the deep, dark quagmire of Labour lies. So the breaking news is that Zelenskyy is speaking. He has spoken, and he says now that if anyone wants to replace him as leader, it won't work as his approval rating is high. This is after there seems to be some demand of a condition of a peace deal is that Ukraine holds elections. Again, it worries me a bit, the sort of, banging at the legitimacy of Ukraine is sort of playing into the Kremlin's lines. The Ukrainian leader goes on to cite a survey, which he says suggests 58% of Ukrainian people have confidence in him as leader. He also says Ukraine is seeing a lot of disinformation from Russia. With all due respect to President Donald Trump, he says, as a leader, he is living in this disinformation space. His comments come after Trump claimed Zelenskyy, who won a 5-year term in 2019, was down at 4% approval rating. It does seem to me to be, I hate to say it, but it does seem to me that sort of Trump's gone full Tucker Carlson and is sort of very much now, I don't know, beguiled by the Kremlin's lines.
There's certainly a tendency within the sort of the MAGA wing of the Republican Party to buy into a lot of that stuff. And the thing is, it's easy to sort of stray down that road even as you're trying to be fair about the situation. Now, we have to be very clear. People often are not fair about what's been going on in Ukraine with regards to, for instance, the influence of the Europeans and the Americans in trying to influence Ukrainian public opinion, Ukrainian policy and the direction of travel of that country. It's not sort of pro-Putin to say that that's been going on. It's also not pro-Putin to point out that there is a lot of very nasty nationalistic tendencies in the Donbass and that a lot of ethnic Russians were not treated particularly well. In most cases would probably be considered crimes against humanity. That said, you can say all that and still say that Ukraine has a right to its territorial independence and that it was wicked of Western countries, having done all this, to not fully back them militarily when the war broke out.
And this is the thing, I think, as per usual in the world of Western media, everything is simplified down to good people versus bad people. And in this, Ukraine is 100% good. In fact, Ukraine has been essentially beatified as a country. It is sacrosanct. You can't criticise Ukraine, especially not little old Zelenskyy in his nice jumpers. Now, I think Zelensky's done a pretty good job and been a good leader during this period. But, there's a lot of truths that can be told about Ukraine without being, well, this is Kremlin speak.
Yeah, but I think it's quite clear that this is a very Americanized thing, isn't it, to say, well, there must be free and fair elections everywhere, absolutely everywhere. That's kind of the, it doesn't matter wherever it is, Damascus or North Korea, that's what they seem to want all the time. But I think Zelenskyy is probably completely right that his approval rating is very good, and even if it wasn't particularly that high, you don't hold free and fair elections whilst half of your country is being occupied and the other half is being bombed.
And also, you can tell this has come from Russia because this is this is totally from the playbook, isn't it? When they went into Crimea, they said, oh, we're going to hold an election, and guess what? 95% of people in Crimea want to be part of Russia, and you're like,
I suspect actually, most people in Crimea did want to be part of Russia, but that was before things actually properly started getting nasty in Donbass. I think that's an important thing to point out, that actually Russia went in and faced almost no opposition, partly because a lot of Crimean people did consider themselves Russian. And again, that's part of the difficulty around all of this, is uncomfortable truths. Lots of Russian people living in Ukraine did want to be part. Many of them have changed their minds subsequently, but at the time, that was very much the case. But also, we say, this is a part of the Russian playbook to say, 100%. Equally, America likes to have lots of, democratic and free elections in other parts of the world that just mysteriously happen to go the way of their particular candidate. I mean, this is what major powers like to do, and they like to use democracy as a tool. And as you know, Alex, full well, sometimes, in the case of the European Union, after they hold votes on things, if they don't get their way, well, you're made to do it again until you do get the answer.
And if the vote isn't going to go the right way, it is simply not held.
I mean, what was Euromaidan? What was Euromaidan if not that?
Exactly.
Let's be clear here.
Right, let's get back to domestic politics, shall we? Because, I mean, come on. The Labour Party are just squalid at this point. That's a good word, isn't it? Squalid.
It's quite good.
But they are squalid. The fibs, the inflation of the truth by Rachel Reeves over and over again shows, to me, it shows a prickly, insecure insecurity about actually their true credentials and capabilities, that they have to sort of exaggerate things, they have to cover up, they puff out their chests and go, I'm this, I've done that, I've been an economist, I can do this, I used to be that, when it turns out they're all a load of absolute useless, underqualified morons. And frankly, you know, if this was the other way round, they always said, oh, Boris Johnson lies. Rachel Reeves has the Olympic record for lying at this point. If this was the other way around, there'd be a massive clamour for her to resign when it comes to lack of credibility and integrity. But I'm not hearing that from legacy channels. Now we've got Jonathan Reynolds. Now, he has been lying to Parliament. Wasn't that exactly what brought down Boris Johnson? The whole, oh, we're going to get Sue Green and this particular legal code, because he lied to Parliament. Well, Jonathan Reynolds, he's also been accused of fabricating his CV after he repeatedly described himself as a solicitor, but never qualified. Right? The business secretary claimed on his website he worked as a solicitor in the Manchester branch of the law firm Addleshaw Goddard before becoming an MP. He didn't qualify because he didn't finish his training contract, having quit the course in 2010 to run for Parliament. So he went in there as a kind of apprentice and then left. And I was like, well, when I was a solicitor. But the thing is, he said that in the Commons. He told the Commons in 2014 that he worked as a solicitor in Manchester city centre before switching careers. And he actually used it as a sort of self-aggrandisement. If you didn't qualify, that's like, you know, you can't do that. You can't be a sort of teacher trainee and, you know, pop in for shadow a few lessons and come out, that's back when I used to be a professor. But they do this time and time again because these people, like I said, I think there's a prickly insecurity because they're actually nobodies.
I think that this culture is very common, actually, and I think that most ordinary people will be sitting here listening to this going that this is wrong, this is completely wrong. But actually, I think in the upper echelons of British society, actually, I think perhaps not lying outright, but
blagging.
massively exaggerating your history, your capabilities.
Your CV.
I think that is completely normal, actually, and I think it does feed. It must be said, it makes me feel a lot better about my CV, on which I've never lied. In fact, I've got a copy of it right here. At least I'm honest. But it's one of those things where, you know, credentialism has crept in to all parts of the upper echelons of life, and you're also seeing it sort of further down, because of course everybody, 50% now, has to have a university degree. So how can you possibly stand out if everybody's got a university degree and all the private school kids, they all got Duke of Edinburgh's awards and all that sort of thing, and they all speak the same languages? Well, you need to find other things to actually set yourself apart, and if you don't have these things, it doesn't actually matter how talented you are, it doesn't matter how good you'd be for a job. If you don't have 43 different things, your CV is never getting past HR, because that's a human gatekeeper just to go, well, it doesn't quite tick that many boxes and that's me done for the day, I need to clock off. But if you don't do that, you haven't got a prayer. So I'm not surprised, actually, that lots of people, I wouldn't say lie outright, but certainly like to embellish their experience and massively, you know, they might miss off the word prospective solicitor and just rub that on, and then it says solicitor. Fantastic.
But this guy didn't just sort of, you know...
This is a particularly egregious case.
He didn't just sort of say, you know, back when I worked in a solicitor's office, he goes to town on it. He riffs on it. He makes the most of it. He goes on to say, and this is what I find is like absolutely balmy, he says, personally, I find being an MP better for work-life balance than being a solicitor and a counsellor.
Because you have to work when you're a solicitor.
Well, no, but the thing is, if you're actually finding your work-life balance is much better as an MP, you're not doing it right, mate. You're not doing it right, because actually that involves basically being in London 4 days a week away from your constituency, where debates can rattle on until 11 o'clock at night, and you can go to any old debate that you want to and sit on the green benches. It means responding to the concerns of all your constituents. It means contributing to the creation and scrutiny of domestic law by sitting on committees as well. It means being lobbied by people to understand the interests of, I don't know, farmers perhaps. And then it means going back to your constituency to meet face to face with the constituents, to get around the constituency, to be visible, to be cutting ribbons and attending fetes, whatever it may be. And a lot of MPs actually think that they're not paid enough because actually the work-life balance is horrific. So, you know, this whole idea is, well, work-life balance is better as an MP than being a solicitor, suggests to me he's just sitting in strangers' bar, necking pints and telling everybody that he used to be the next big thing in law.
Yeah, being a solicitor is these days not in fact a very good job. People are massively overworked and they are underpaid. So I would agree with him, actually, that you probably do have a better work-life balance if you're an MP, if nothing else, because you're likely to be paid at least twice the amount that you are a solicitor. We don't have enough solicitors in this country, funnily enough. You know, the cuts under the coalition government to the justice system have hollowed that part of the profession out. This is a very serious thing, and same with barristers. We don't actually have enough very skilled barristers working in this country, and that's when you then see things like rape cases being 2-3 years after the fact. That's actually the knock-on effect. I know people like to go, oh, well, we don't want to pay fat cat lawyers very much money. The knock-on effect of that, though, is that you don't get justice when you're attacked. But when it comes to the issue of MPs, it is a difficult one, because being an MP is very much what you decide to make of it. Lots of people just do it, I think, because it's a sort of a status thing.
It's celebrity for ugly people. Yeah. That's what it is.
That's politics.
That is what has happened now. Back in the day, you'd have someone from the shop floor, you know.
Not for you, though, Alex. You weren't elected to the House of Commons. Oh, no.
No, I went to the Pretty Parliament.
You went to the slightly more La Maison Grande. That's where you were.
Yeah, packed full of hotties over there. But this is the thing, right? A lot of people are entering politics because they just want to be an MP. They don't actually have any ideology. They don't want to sacrifice anything. They just want to be elected because they think it makes them the big I am at dinner parties. They have never actually put anything on the line for anything they believe in ever, right? Yeah. And this is where actually, by and large, when it comes to certain parties, and they tend to be the smaller parties, there are people sacrificing day in, day out, and especially if it's a particular, you know, I can't sort of sit and promote a party, but I know lots of people over the course of time when it comes to, you know, everyone knows I used to be head of media for UKIP and I was a Brexit Party MEP. Now, when people join those parties, and I'm not talking about necessarily the people who then get elected, but we're talking about campaigners, canvassers, regional organisers, they are sacrificing so much because previously they would be ostracised from friendship groups. They might lose contracts if they've got, you know, self-employed with various clients because you get associated with something that's deemed beyond the pale. These people are standing up for what they believe in a you know, landscape where at one point confessing to be a Brexiteer was basically asking for yourself to be sent off to, you know, Coventry for the rest of your life.
I thought you were going to say Europe.
Put in an oubliette to disappear.
What's wrong with Coventry?
And so this is what but when it comes to the legacy parties, there are a load of people in there who just swan about, who actually don't have a clue about politics. They believe in nothing. They got no conviction. They've got no shred of integrity. They've got absolutely zero courage. They're clogging up those green benches when there are people out there with real world experience and a belief system who truly want to do it for the duty and the honour and the service.
You're talking about the Conservative Party, right?
I'm talking about most of them.
Fortunately, there aren't as many of them as there used to be. But this was one of the great sort of things that really caused outrage at the, you know, in the run-up to the last general election, when you had so many Tory MPs saying that they were going to step down, or saying things like maybe we deserve to lose because we need a period in opposition. And then you've got all of those campaigners and canvassers who do the hard, you know, legwork, sat there going, I'm sorry, what is it that I'm signing up for exactly? Why am I bothering to do this if your attitude is, well, I'm just a Tory MP and things will be fine for me and I'll get back in a few years if I lose my seat and I'll go work as a consultant in the meantime.
A lot of the Conservative Party MPs, if they really had conviction and integrity, would have quit the Tory Party a long time ago and said to Nigel Farage, do you know what, I'm singing off the same hymn sheet as you. They stayed in the Conservative Party because they thought it would make their seats safe. They thought their own prospects would be better by sticking with the Tories, and they were too weak-willed to actually sacrifice anything or take a risk. I'm sorry, that is just
true. No, that's true, although the odds are you're better off if you're a Tory MP. Even now, your odds are
but that's what I mean. But actually,
better.
If more of them had said, this party doesn't represent my views and that one does,
exactly.
I mean, it would have moved the political needle sooner.
If there'd been a sort of an exodus of not even that many, 5, 10 MPs had just gone, actually, yes,
I'm going to stand up for what I believe in.
Then I think actually, certainly reform.
And what my constituents believe in.
But this is a very important thing, actually, I just have to say, that reform needs to avoid, and that is the curse of just taking in former Tory MPs now.
Yeah, because all of a sudden,
and you see a few of them sort of cozying up and thinking, and you must say, the voters are not stupid. They will see that, and they will punish reform if they are seen to be the lifeboat for Tories who should have jumped earlier.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. Now, listen, we are going to go to a break, but after the break, we want you to get in touch with us and come for a chinwag with old Benny Boy and Alex. And you can talk about whatever we've been discussing so far today, the integrity of the Labour Party. You can talk about, oh gosh, that BBC-Hamas relationship, for want of a better phrase. What about your parcels? How many of them are getting lifted? Everybody's saying that they're going to be losing 22,000 parcels a day because they'll either get damaged en route when people just, I don't know, lob them over a garden fence or like chuck them in the back of the van, or else probably get nicked by people who see them on the doorstep and go, oh, thank you very much, I'll help myself to that. Let us know your thoughts on that one as well. Or, of course, if you want to wade into the complex world of geopolitics, that is still one of the biggest stories of the day and will continue to be, no doubt, for a long time to come. The number to call, 0344 499 1000. That's charged at your standard network rate, so therefore the same as if you order a takeaway or, I don't know, phone up Every to find out where your parcel is. So I don't know what their network rate is. It might not be that. You can use that number to WhatsApp us as well, or leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. You know how dearly I love those. 8722 is the number to text. You can write the word, well, you must write the word talk before your message. That way it is routed directly into this studio and not another studio talking about football or full of centrist dads. We are on X at talkTV, and I'm back after this.
We've now got the ridiculous prospect as well, Henry, of asylum seekers who come here illegally who are now bringing members of their families in.
Correct, because they still fall under that Article 8 of the ECHR. Now, I was, some years ago, of the opinion that it was worth opening the ECHR with the other signatories of the convention to try and reform it. And a lot of people say that that's what we should still try and do.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. It's your opportunity to throw in your two-bit. Let's start off with a few messages, shall we? Because I've been a bit remiss. I haven't actually read any out so far, which is naughty. It's already 22 minutes past 11. The day is rushing away. Alex, why has it taken President Trump to expose the fact that Zelenskyy is clinging to power in Ukraine? Why has this not been reported? It appears he has cancelled elections not because of war, but because he will be trounced. Trump is also asking the question that many of us have been asking: where have the billions of pounds in aid to Ukraine gone? That's from Paul in Fife. I mean, they should Doge that for sure. Doge everything. I'm very Doge, very pro-Doge. But look, I don't know about the polling in Ukraine of President Zelenskyy, so I can't say one way or t'other. But I have a feeling he's not as unpopular as you might be making out. Alex, good morning. President Trump should be given credit. For Jesus said, I love it when God enters the room. It's Jesus time, ladies and gentlemen. You know I'm a Christian, so I'm up for this. Matthew 5:9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Why are people losing their heads by the prospect of peace? Or because they kind of worry it's not peace at all. It's fake news peace. Fake news. And it'll actually just become more war. But no, I agree. Dialogue is important. And when the first sort of outburst of, oh my God, they're sitting with Putin, was definitely Trump derangement syndrome. You should never have started it, said Trump. This is the most boneheaded, inaccurate and stupid comment I've ever heard. And I, like Alex, am a Trump fan. Yeah, I agree. I just don't think that was a wise thing to say. Putin is a dictator, but does the West really care for Ukrainian people, or is it that they want control of the minerals and the grain staying in NATO's hands? Well, obviously it's the latter, but I think actually the West does seem to care about Ukrainian people because we opened our arms, rightly so, in the resettlement scheme, where genuine refugees came to this country. And I think it was amazing how many Brits said, come, live in my home, have my spare room, join my family. It was a beautiful moment, actually. Maybe the West have more secrets hidden in Ukraine. They don't want to come out. Oh, all countries have secrets hidden everywhere. If we weren't in the game trying to, snatch up some minerals, then we'd be utterly useless. Unfortunately, I think, by and large, the country fits more into the latter category. I wish we were a bit more assertive about being more canny on the international stage. Let's take some calls now. Georgina is in London. Hi, Georgina.
Good morning, good morning. And I'm a Christian as well, so we're in good company. I'm not surprised at all that Trump is taking the initial reins on the Russia-Ukraine crisis. He doesn't want the EU row karate within a farmer's mile downwind of Putin until he has negotiated enough to have something to bring to the political table. You've got to realise that Putin has an ego the size of the Western Hemisphere, but they don't realise Donald Trump has done more political mileage than the Space Shuttle Discovery, and he knows how to massage this man's ego until he has something conducive to bring to Zelensky's table. The EU have known about this problem for the last 3 years and done absolutely nothing. It's taken Trump to take the reins and get the ball rolling, and now the EU are all screaming, jumping up and down, and want to be on the resolution bandwagon.
She's right, isn't she? She's pretty much bang on about that. The fact that the EU leaders are saying, we want to be part of these talks. You've been useless. You've been absolutely weak-willed, lily-livered, not singing off the same hymn sheets. You're the one who appeased Putin for years and years and years and years and years and enabled him to do what he's done. You can't agree on anything, whether sanctions should be applied, weapons. And now when Trump says, OK, look, I kind of get this man. He's got a massive ego. I've got a massive ego. Unfortunately, in all of this, Zelenskyy isn't the big boy in the room. If this is going to get sorted out, this has got to be between, me who can do something and the man we need to stop. And that's what he's done.
It is. You've got to recognise that. And this is a bit of a problem, I think, for a lot of particularly Brexiteers, because this is a problem of the European Union not being an assertive bloc, not in fact racing towards being one monolithic kind of global power, and actually finding itself very fractured and not focusing on these things, which is of course what the average British Eurosceptic would go, well, that's a very good thing, because then we'd be pulled further into its orbit. The flip side of that is it leaves the entirety of the continent very much exposed to the desires of other powers, and the problem with that, of course, is Britain has not decided to become, a sort of a North Sea version of Japan and go its own way. It's decided to sort of sit there twiddling its thumbs and decide, we can't decide what direction to go in.
I mean, I'd say as a Brexiteer, the argument for the idea of PESCO, which is the EU wanting its army and, common defence and international diplomacy. The argument was always that it would undermine NATO, and they haven't got a clue what they're blimmin' doing.
Well,
and I think that's sort of demonstrated itself.
How can you have a united European defence policy, though, given actually how disparate the continent is? What on earth use does Poland have for a large navy or large naval procurement? Italy might want that. It might desperately need it. But Poland's not going to pay for that, is it?
Different cultural backgrounds, languages. It's not like you can just go, oh, Europe is one thing now. We've veered off topic there, but Georgina, thank you ever so much for your call. Let's speak to John, who's in Dorset. Hi, John.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I have two words for you: reimagine and woke. So favoured by the BBC, who have given us a black Anne Boleyn, an Asian David Copperfield, and I think the Empress Josephine was also black. But moving on, the Australians have a word for it. They call it coming the raw prawn. You know, you're taking the, the military call it stolen valour.
Yeah.
And the Navy call it swinging the lantern. In all forms, I've imagined if the slightest thing had come out from the Conservatives, they would be going ballistic on this, and they've been caught.
Yeah,
well, I mean, imagine Morgan McSweeney, who is a pretty shrewd political officer, must be grinding his teeth and wonder what his chief of staff is.
Well, on all of that, I mean, you raise a point about when you come up with all this sort of, rewriting history and the interpretation of reality through the prism of wokery, which I think you're sort of alluding here to that BBC documentary, filmed by kids in Gaza, showing you what their life is like and how difficult it is. Turns out they're the kids of Hamas. I mean, there does seem to be this huge problem with projecting a narrative that they want it to be, or wished it was in retrospect. And it doesn't actually pertain to the truth at all. Thank you ever so much for your call, John, my darling. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we're going to be talking about the fact that 3 million people are now claiming benefits without any obligation to seek work. And what's worse is millions are spending 5 years on benefits without having to find a job. Make that make sense. I'm back after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Sorry about that. If you're watching, eating a pear is the most dangerous piece of fruit I think you can probably eat in live broadcasting in an advert break, because you get the sort of dual attack of juices running off your chin and bits of pear skin between your teeth, and also it's just they're really hard to navigate. You smear it all over your face as well. Next time I'm just going to get a bunch of grapes. Okay. Now, let's talk about... I'm going to lose my job soon, aren't I? I'm going to be one of these people on benefits. Right. See my segue? That's why they continue to keep me. Now, let's talk about the benefit system, because utterly ridiculous. It just gets worse and worse. The level of worklessness, I think it's hit 9 million now. 9 million people not working. 3 million are claiming benefits with no obligation to even seek work. I mean, the number of people claiming universal credit while looking for work has remained broadly stable. Okay, fair. But there are people, so this was published Tuesday, showed the number claiming it with no requirement to work at all has doubled in 3 years. Why? Let's speak now to Chris Snowdon, Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. We love Chris. Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Hello, my darling. Right, tell me about this. We know that there's a big problem in this country that, we kind of have a work-shy Britain. I'd imagine a lot of this stuff is sort of tacked onto the amount of people who suddenly have decided they don't want to work anymore. There's no sort of compelling factor to work when benefits probably pay as much as low-paid jobs. And equally these days, they can just say, I'm a bit depressed, and that's enough.
Yes, that's definitely part of it, but they've been given all the wrong incentives by the government, by the last government. So when we talk about people who are claiming benefit with no requirement to work, we basically mean people on sickness benefit. And in the 80s, it's pretty well known that the government pushed a lot of people onto sickness benefit to make the unemployment figures look better. That's not what's happening here. In fact, in a way, the government's trying to do the opposite. It's trying to get people off sickness benefit. As I say again, this is the last Conservative government. So what they did was, because they considered the short-term sickness benefit to be too generous, because you get paid more if you're on the sick than if you're on the dole, which is right enough, but they saw that as a problem. So they made the short-term sickness benefit less generous, but they made the long-term benefit more generous, because quite rightly they thought, well, if people are in wheelchairs or bedbound and never going to work again, they need to have a decent amount to live on, whereas the unemployment benefit should be a bit more stingy to encourage people to go out to work. Nothing wrong with that in theory. The trouble was, it then meant that a whole load of people who were previously been on short-term sick and would legitimately get better and look for work have now been effectively persuaded or encouraged to take long-term sickness benefit. And so we've got this rapidly escalating number of people who are on long-term sick, who then find it quite difficult to turn around and go, actually, I feel all right now, because you've just claimed that, there's something seriously wrong with you. Doctors don't really care. They'll sign anybody off for short-term sickness or long-term sickness. And so we have this huge problem of people who are basically unemployed. Some of them will be genuinely sick, some of them will be short-term sick, and some of them, as you say, will just be saying, well, I haven't got a job, I'm not particularly interested in getting a job right now, so my best way of making some kind of livelihood is to claim long-term sick. It's a complete disaster. It's so easily avoidable as well, and this is one of the main problems facing the country at the moment, because quite obviously we're not only paying out billions of pounds in unnecessary benefits to people, but we're not getting any benefit. They're being unproductive. We're not getting any income tax and so on.
I mean, I remember the good old days when newspapers were littered with those gotcha photographs of, this is Joe, he claims he's got a slipped vertebra, he's been, claiming the sick for a year now, and here he is jumping out of out of an aeroplane with a parachute for charity and stuff like that. And I remember when that used to be sort of like a regular theme in newspapers. Aha, you're not really that bad. There's no Zimmer frame in front of you. You're running the London Marathon. Whereas the problem now is a number of things, it seems to me. You've got, this huge uptick in mental health being a reason to be off work sick. Look, I'm sure people genuinely have some pretty horrible psychiatric conditions, maybe PTSD, grief leave or whatever. But I kind of think that work is quite good for mental health. I think we've also got a huge lifestyle change where once upon a time there was, sitting at home unable to work, you'd be bouncing off your walls. Now you've got Netflix and, Deliveroo or whatever, and less societal shame. And so I think that's made it easier. And then, of course, I think you've got a huge amount of fraud. I think the system is very vulnerable to that. We saw the Albanian gangs who were making millions and millions of pounds by creating false characters claiming universal credit, and people who have advice on TikTok. If you want to get long-term sick, all you've got to do is answer these questions like this. But you just said earlier, I want to pick up on this, that it is very avoidable. How? Please tell me how.
Well, the easiest thing would just be to go back to the system we had before, which wasn't perfect. Ideally, you'd want to redesign the system completely to try and get rid of these perverse incentives. But the easiest thing to do would just be to go back to what it was like in 2018 or whatever. When you've got the number of people on these benefits rising from well under 1 million to over 3 million in the space of 5 years, it's pretty obvious that something's going on, right? We haven't had some huge health problem. Some people will go, it's long COVID. A few of these people probably will be long COVID. Some people say, it's obesity or it's NHS waiting list. I'm not saying that these things have no impact on the figures whatsoever, but it doesn't explain more than 2 million people suddenly going on sickness benefits. It's the fault of the system. It's the fault of people claiming fraudulently too. It's the fault of doctors signing off people just because they say they've got anxiety. There is a kind of perfect storm here that leads to the system being massively exploited, and it is costing us an absolute fortune. And pretty much everything else the government's trying to do to save money is trivial compared to getting to grips with this particular problem.
I think we've also got a sort of epidemic of melancholy in this country. People don't like their country, they don't like their jobs, they don't like their lives. Everyone's kind of in retreat mode rather than thinking, I want to go to work and see my colleagues and I earn money, and with that money I can then go to the pub. The pubs are shutting down, you know. People are just like, oh God, I hate Britain, I hate my life. And I think that's had a huge impact. A lot of that I think is in part due to COVID. Well, not a lot, some of it in part due to COVID, but the sort of demoralisation that's been part of our lives and our politics now for, you know, at least a decade. But do you think we need to get a bit more stringent about, because, you know, when people are supposed to be finding jobs to get themselves out of being off work, do we have to sort of say, well, you're not applying for the right jobs, you should have to take this one? Is there too much leniency as well in that system, or actually you should be prepared to travel a bit further to go to work?
Well, that might be the case for people claiming unemployment benefit, but those numbers haven't risen. You know, the problem we're talking about here is you've got twice as many people on these benefits as no work requirement at all than you have on people who are job seekers. I think probably most job seekers legitimately are job seekers. The problem we've got here is a very specific one to do with incapacity. The last government under David Cameron, they really had a crackdown on people claiming disability benefit, and there was huge outrage from various people, but actually it worked, and there was a lot of people came off disability benefit who didn't need to be on it. A lot of people, I suspect, would have started working thinking, oh, I can't, you know, go back into full-time work because of my mental health disorder, whatever, but actually found that their mental health disorder got a lot better when they started working. So look, it's always a difficult one because you don't want to penalise people who are genuinely incapacitated and ill. You don't want to put them on very, very low incomes. It's cruel, but at the same time, you can't have the system exploited in this way. And you know, like I say, it's a massive problem that is avoidable.
I think we need a significant dose of life isn't fairism. I think when you look at the statistics, one of the biggest growing demographics of people who are now not in work and claiming sick leave are 18 to 25-year-olds. And I'm sorry, if I was when I was that age, the age of 18, I upped and left home and went to university the opposite side of the country. And I've never gone back to my home city since. And I've moved all over the place for work. I've lived in multiple countries and multiple cities in the UK. And I think when it comes to 18 to 25-year-olds, they should be told, right, you haven't got a job, go and pick fruit in the West Midlands, or go and do this because that's where the jobs are. Get up and go. You're young, you don't have ties, you don't have responsibilities, and you need to learn that you've got to look after yourself. I think it's way too easy for people.
Yeah, I mean, that's another issue, which is the massive overdiagnosis and self-diagnosis of fairly mild mental health conditions. And again, you want to look after people who've got genuine mental health conditions who are genuinely not able to work. But it's pretty obvious when you look at the graph of the number of people who are claiming these benefits, but also who claim to have various mental health disorders. And you look at what those mental health disorders are, and most of the time it's things like depression, anxiety, sleeplessness. You know, don't want to completely trivialize these things, but you know they shouldn't really be stopping you from working for years and years, particularly at a young age, 18 to 24. It's terrible that so many people think they have these conditions.
Yeah, and you know what? Getting out of bed and going and doing something usually is the cure. Chris, thank you ever so much. It's always wonderful to catch up with you. Always talk brilliant sense. Now, let's speak to Mark, who's in Bognor Regis. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Alex. It's first time ringing talk.
Oh, brilliant. Welcome aboard. Lovely to have you.
I'm going to talk to you about long-term sick. I'm one of these long-term sick.
Yeah.
I suffer with multiple health problems. And a lot of my problems is I can't get the social care that I need. I have no visitors, hardly enter my home. I live indoors like a little hermit. I used to work. I loved my job, but sadly my health got worse and worse and worse. Multiple health issues. I'm not going to go into them with you.
You don't have to.
But, you know, when I hear, you know, that people long-term sick should work, has anyone ever thought some people wish they could work?
Yeah, no, I mean, but this, I'm glad you said that, and I'm glad you've called in. Thank you ever so much, Mark. I mean, Chris did say, and I totally agree, that when people have genuine medical needs, they should be receiving, income that is higher than potentially job seekers. You know, they need to be able to maintain a lifestyle to protect them, and that is at the core of a welfare system, and I agree with that.
Mr. Cameron, David Cameron, when he did the cuts, when he was in charge, my benefits were cut really bad, and one of the MP secretaries got a specialist in for my case, and the specialist turned round and said, why was this man's benefits stopped? Clearly, you know, if I could work, I'd be out like tomorrow working.
Yeah.
But I've got about 8-9 different health issues going on.
But this is the thing. It sounds to me, Mark, like you really are entitled for the rest of society stepping in and helping you and putting their arms around you and saying, you know, your situation is really cruel and we want to make sure you can live comfortably, and we're all wanting for that to be the case. But perhaps one of the reasons...
I also have 3 volumes of my mental health notes indoors in my home.
Yeah.
In 2010, when David Cameron got in charge, my mental health was dropped with no reason why. People's asked why, because I still got my problems. Why was my mental health stopped? No answer.
Right. I mean, but this is the difficulty, isn't it? Trying to make sure that people like you get the assistance and the welfare state that they really do need, and then trying to weed out people who, unlike you, really might benefit from going out and working and being part of society. And that's something you so desperately want to do. And so I think the big question here is, how do we make sure that we can weed out the people who really shouldn't be sitting at home and not working when they're capable of doing so, and it would be a great, it would be a great fillip to them. And actually, if we did that and reduce the pool of people who are now claiming benefits, that would enable the system to then provide better for you. And I think this is the great issue and the great difficulty we face in the modern era. Mark, thank you ever so much, and thank you for being a first-time caller and sharing your story with us. Really, really important that people feel they can do that and challenge us and say, look, this is my situation. You know, my benefits have been cut. You have no idea what impact on my life that has had. A part of those benefits were for mental health, and so it is important that we talk about this in the fully rounded way that it deserves. Now, talking about mental health, coming up after the break is Kevin O'Sullivan.
Such an emotional time to be a farmer right now, and everybody is pent up, but we don't completely understand the parliamentary government's timetable, and we all have to be measured. We all make mistakes. The government have made a mistake. How that happened, I don't know. They got their figures wrong. Instead of pointing the finger of blame, what we have to do is come together as a nation, because whilst we are small in number, we actually feed the British people.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Well, by now we should be joining Kevin O'Sullivan, or him joining us. But typically, and I've seen this before, right, with Kev, that man's trying to, like, I don't know, connect to Zoom, and he's got no... I can imagine right now he's sitting there huffing, puffing, the amount of swear words coming out of his mouth where it's like, I haven't plugged in a microphone, the computer's turning off, it's facing the wrong direction, he's lost his glasses. He'll be blaming everybody else in the world, stomping around, and he is, isn't he? That's what he's doing, I can tell. But so we are waiting for Kev to join us when he figures out how to join the 21st century and operate a laptop. I mean, I love him. We are going to be talking about Meghan Markle. How hot are you on discussing her? Yeah, I know, this is why we need Kev, really. Anyway.
And another thing that I really hate, Meghan Markle.
Meghan Markle. I can use the time to tell you that coming up very soon, 12:45, so in an hour's time, I'm going to be joined by Liz Truss. She has gone over to Washington, D.C. for CPAC, which is the big gathering of the great and the good. Nigel's gone there as well. It's like 1 minute it's ARC conference, next minute it's CPAC. They're both going to be giving big competing speeches, keeping the British end up at the other side of the pond. And so we're going to be having her live from DC talking to us about what she thinks the state of the nation is.
Well, that's going to be exciting, isn't it?
I love Liz.
I know, and I'm very cruel about Liz Truss. No, so many people are, and I understand that you have to stick up for her. But honestly, and you mentioned actually that there was also this ARC conference that's been going on in London. I find this all very, frankly, demoralising. Nothing new is being said at these conferences, nothing particularly groundbreaking or anything like that. Do you know what was good, of course, was J.D. Vance's speech in Europe, just that little 20-minute speech. That was all you needed. And what these conferences do is recycle about 20 years worth of old talking points. There's nothing particularly interesting. I know exactly what it is that Liz Truss is going to say. I know what Nigel Farage is going to say. Doesn't mean that they're wrong. Let me be very clear. Doesn't mean that they're wrong. It just means we're still going up against the same barriers to these things. Talking about growth, talking about deregulation, and we're still going to hit the same buffers. One
thing, actually, that CPAC could be used for, if we're sending the British contingent, and one thing that I know both Nigel Farage and Liz Truss do actually agree on, is, you cannot just hand Putin a win. You've got to be pragmatic, and actually there does need to be support for Ukraine. So perhaps they can use it as an opportunity while they're addressing essentially the Republican Party.
Yeah, but that's not what
they're
there
for. To make that case.
That's not what they're there for. They're there for other reasons. That'll just be a little sideshow, and actually it won't matter because nobody's going to listen to what they say.
We don't know that, but we can ask Liz Truss later, can't we?
We can.
That is the whole point. Look, Kev is finally here. Thank goodness.
Where?
Well, here. Is he? Where is he? Is he?
I'm here.
Oh, blimmin' heck, there he is. Could have brushed your hair.
All right, how's that?
That's nice. I love you, Kev. I knew when they said, Kev hasn't connected yet, I just wish there was like a camera. Actually, that process of you trying to plug in the laptop, turn it on, do that, it's amazing.
It just happened again, Alex. I just had a few technical problems. It seems to happen to me every single time. It's not me, it's the technology, I promise.
Oh, right.
You.
No, I think you are the technical problem, Kev.
I'm always the one who's there, so maybe it is me.
You're not the woke mind virus, you're a computer virus. Right, okay, let's talk about Meghan Markle, because, this is... she just stumbles into one catastrophe after another. You've now got the Mallorcan mayor saying, you've nicked our symbol, our national symbol, as your blimmin' lifestyle brand's logo. And when you look at the two together, you kind of go, yeah, you got a point. Did she just go into like randomlogogenerator.com and because of algorithms and AI, it made that thing?
Well, look, bear in mind that this is the latest sort of incarnation of her lifestyle website that was called American Riviera Orchard. All of a sudden, after a year, she launched it last March. After a year, she suddenly changed the name to As Ever. Now, the reason she's had to do that is the logo, the name, American Riviera Orchard, has been locked in legal hell, legal wrangling, loads of challenges saying you can't have that trademark, it's too geographical. One major American shopping chain saying you've stolen our name, and so on and so forth. So she's had to drop that all of a sudden, change it to As Ever, and then quickly come up with this new logo. And lo and behold, there's another legal problem. It clashes with this little village in Mallorca, and they are furious. So what we've got here is a picture of a woman who is stumbling shambolically from one hurried measure to the next, and it just is a complete mess. This is the Daily Mail's headline yesterday was, "Is this Meghan's latest disaster?" And it's looking like it is.
Yeah, I would go on to say as incompetent as ever. You can see how people are going to riff off that. I mean, this is the thing. I think it kind of exposes that when it comes to all these people in their PR and marketing firms, and they're paid like £200,000. Oh my God, we got such inspiration. We're going to work on this, and we're going to mock up that, and then here's our proposal, and actually it's going to cost you like no. Most of them are just rubbish idiots who haven't got a brain cell in their head, who literally just go onto a website and go, "Can you make me a logo that shows a nice palm tree?" And it just goes, the computer does it for them, then comes out of Mallorca. Good money after bad. Right, let's talk about the fact that she's now still blaming, guess who for all of her woes? Oh, that's right, her relatives.
Yeah, well, she's taken to, since she's relaunched her Instagram account a couple of months ago, she's taken to making these breathless little films. A couple of weeks ago, excruciatingly and embarrassingly, she made a video about getting a kid a Billie Eilish t-shirt because she'd had her house destroyed, including the washing machine, in which was her Billie Eilish t-shirt. And basically, Meghan made a big thing about how I got hold of Billie and Billie gave her this t-shirt. Oh, it's so great. Well, you know, you could have got it off the internet for about $15 in about 2 seconds flat. So that was embarrassing. That was slammed by all and sundry. And now she's made this new video saying, "Oh, at last, my business is going to happen. It's so great." And she says, we're going to call it As Ever. And she says, "We've had As Ever registered since 2022. Well, why didn't you call it As Ever then? You didn't call it As Ever, did you? You called it American Riviera Orchard." So suddenly, I think by Netflix, who are trying to recoup some of the $100 million they gave to the gruesome twosome, Harry and Meghan, Netflix have got involved, and they've said, "Look, we're going to sell your produce at our stores in shopping malls in both Texas and Philadelphia, and we're going to coincide with the launch of your show With Love, Meghan, which goes out on March the 4th." And they're just trying to. So this is the latest sort of iteration of this shambolic business that after almost a year, it's been open. She launched it a year ago. It has never sold a damn thing. It is not open for business. And this is a latest desperation measure. And once again, in her naive way, she has waded straight into a legal roadblock.
Well, it's narcissism. Isn't the royal family were really terrified of Harry getting married to her because she's a baked-in mad narcissist. And when you listen to what she says, it's all like, "I lost my voice, finally able to have my voice. I wanted to share it with you, but I haven't been able to share it with you in the same way because of the royal family. You know, they wouldn't let me essentially become the entire Meghan show because, you know, family is in the title there. It's about the royal family. You're part of, you know, a whole group of people representing a nation." But, you know, she's not able to talk about cooking and gardening and produce and, you know, the things that are really trendy. But what about Highgrove? That's literally got its own produce that princes, princesses and duchesses are allowed to try their hand and, you know, get involved with that. She could have just like thrown herself into like, you know, duchy products or something, but instead, no, she wanted to do it all herself. It has to be Meghan's munch.
Yeah, exactly. And she's implying in this video, in this statement, that while she was under the repressive hand of the British royal family, I mean, apart from the fact, you know, she's already maintained they're just a bunch of racists, they also now, we learn from her, suppressed her fantastic talent for cooking and gardening. You know, I mean, I like to cook. I don't say I'm that great, but, you know, I could do a program, say, "Hey, cooking with Kev, it's great, yeah. Oh, look, here's Kev digging up the garden. Oh, he's planted a rose." That's not a business. What is her special skill?
Well, her special skill is talking about Meghan. That's the thing. If you look at all the things that Meghan produces, that Meghan wants to do, it's like, well, I really think this programme should be about me interviewing other brilliant women. You do all the work and I'm going to take some credit. This programme should all be about me in a kitchen, which is perfectly designed, talking about my perfect life so I can look really perfect. Oh, this programme should all be about me going to meet people who have been affected by the wildfires, even though it's nowhere near to anything that I know. I mean, that is what Meghan's special skill is, and that's pretty much Netflix have gone, all right, here she comes, the self-promoter. I suppose we better give her a programme on self-promoting.
Well, they've got this deal. So they've got the remnants of this $100 million contract that, in my view, they very unwisely forged with Harry and Meghan. They haven't got much out of it. Now, this is the tail end of that deal. They are just desperately trying to recoup any cash possible. Now, what I think that they think at Netflix is, well, you know, just maybe there's an outside chance that Meghan would love a program, but during which you can learn such vital things as how to freeze edible flower petals into ice cubes. This is an important stuff during the cost of living crisis. They think, well, we'll get that show out. We'll try to sell some of her jam, and you never know, maybe, just maybe, it might take off. But what is this business based on? It is based on sort of trying to sell nice things, you know, like jam and towels.
Would you rather she sort of joined the sort of climate change movement and was trying to sell like witchetty grubs and locusts instead?
Yeah, but she's trying to sell all these nice things for exorbitant prices. You know, so in other words, you can get a beige towel for her that will cost you down the street, you know, I don't know, 10 quid. You can get it from her for about 40 quid or $50, whatever. So it's overpriced Meg branding. And I just don't think Americans are going to buy it. Why would they do this? This is the cost of living crisis. You know, I don't need to know how to freeze petals into ice cubes. And B, if I want to get a beige towel, I know I'll spend 10 quid on it, not 50. This business, I would say, put it this way, has got a mountain to climb.
Well, we just have to hope and pray she doesn't release a Gwyneth Paltrow-style candle. We all know what that was made of. Do you know what would be absolutely brilliant? Well, when does this thing come out on Netflix?
March the 4th.
Do you know, we should get together, right? We should watch it and just be like, you know, our own version of Gogglebox. Sit there and slag off every single little scene in it and then just put it out to the world to enjoy as some sort of, you know, release.
You see, you should have kept that idea to yourself. That is a really good idea. Let's do it.
Well, there you go. Well, I told you about it. There you go. We'll get on with it. And now I've said it on air, people are going to be demanding it. We've built up an audience, unlike Meghan.
Everybody will be doing it now.
Oh,
but yeah,
no, they won't do it as well as us. Well, Kev, well done, can I just say, well done for being able to set up your computer. We appreciate it. You're coming on leaps and bounds, my friend. All right, there you go, the gorgeous Kevin O'Sullivan. Don't go anywhere because there is so much more coming up in the last hour of the show, including former Prime Minister Liz Truss.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened.
I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. A shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, Oivamo slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, man of...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the programme. Alex Phillips here with you until 1 o'clock, joined by the glorious Benedict Spence. We're going to get him back out of the cupboard now. We've managed to connect with Kev. I mean, we did try and get Benedict to talk about Meghan Markle, but...
I think, actually, the big miss that Netflix has done there is not actually having Kevin as Meghan's sidekick in this cooking show. Actually, given that we all know that Kevin, likes to throw things around and swear when things don't necessarily work, I think that would actually be the perfect juxtaposition. You have Meghan trying to do the whole, and this is what we made earlier, and then you'd hear in the background that something smashing, and I think that would actually be the perfect balance. I don't think it would be a very good balance for Kev. I think that might send his blood pressure slightly too high, but for the audience it would be great. And then you could be like one of the two on Bake Off who are sort of sat there mediating the whole thing. You'd be that
right, so I just sit in judgment.
Yeah, exactly. Well, just pan to your face and you would just stare down the camera.
That's basically what I'm paid to do. Every time I come in here, I just sit in judgment.
Everybody would be
playing
to their strengths, and finally Netflix would have a hit that involved Meghan Markle.
Well, there you go.
What's not to love?
I love it. Right, well, let's write to the executives and see what we can do.
I want 20 quid for that idea. That was an absolute banger.
That was
quid.
a banger. But
that'll get me like half a pint.
You did sort of nick from my idea of Kev and I doing the goggle box.
Yeah, all the best ideas are stolen, though, aren't they?
They are, indeed.
And I don't see your name trademarked on that idea. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to write a trademark right now.
No, because you've got a show to host.
You can get those.
Okay. Go on, let's see who can do it faster.
All right.
There'll be somebody listening at home. No, right now, Kev's going, that's not a bad idea.
We're going to be talking about Ukraine, so you can do some heavy lifting on this, seeing as you're Mr. Geopolitics. So, as you know, today it's come out that Trump demands that Zelenskyy holds elections as part of some form of peace deal. Zelenskyy saying that he thinks Trump is living in a disinformation bubble. And Trump making a statement that, on the surface of this, kind of made quite a few Brits and, well, certainly a lot of Europeans go, oh, gosh, I'm not sure about this. This sounds a bit too pro-Kremlin. Should we have a listen? Should we get that clip out and have a little listen to what Trump had to say?
And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue what he...
Well, let's speak now to Steve Gill, former advisor to Clinton and Bush. Steve, I've always been very pro-MAGA. I was over inauguration. I think a lot of things happening over your side of the pond are really good. I'm very for Doge and, getting rid of all the woke nonsense. But when it comes to the foreign affairs, I gave Trump the benefit of the doubt and thought, well, OK, actually sitting down and starting dialogue with Putin is important. The idea that you're going to make him a pariah, not speak to him, barely, give arms to Ukraine, barely apply sanctions, argue over what the approach should be and hope that it all resolves itself is for the birds. And so Europe essentially wanted Donald Trump to slide in and sort everything out. And I think initially I was quite grateful he was going to do this. But I, like a lot of other Brits, I'm going to read you a message here, actually. Mike in Lincoln says, like you, I'm a huge Trump fan. I wish we could have someone like him in government in the UK. A lot of my listeners would agree to that. But listening to what he's saying about Ukraine and his repeating of the Kremlin attack lines about the war, I'm starting to wonder if the rumours about Putin having compromise on the Donald may have credence. This is the problem. We're sitting here in Britain. At first, great, Trump's going to solve this. But now he's like, well, you know, Ukraine, you brought it on yourself, and you've now got to, you know, pay the price for there being peace, not good old Russia. Oh, Putin says there should be elections because no one likes you, Zelenskyy. And we're like, oh, gosh, he's kind of gone a bit Tucker Carlson, and that doesn't seem to accord with the reality as we see it.
Well, I think that's the problem, reality as we see it. And you've had Western media, including British media, telling one side of the story about Ukraine for the last 3 years. And now Trump is striding in and bringing reality in. And by the way, spanking Zelenskyy so hard, I think neither he nor his cabinet would be able to sit down for a week with the statements he was making. But let's be honest, Zelenskyy is a dictator. He's canceled elections. He's canceled opposition media. He's canceled opposition political parties and attacked churches. So this is not the hero of democracy we've been told. And then he admits that over $100 billion in U.S. aid, humanitarian aid sent his way, is somehow missing. So I think that, again, we're getting a dose of reality. And just because it's reality doesn't mean it's pro-Russia.
Yeah, do you know what? I agree with absolutely everything you have said there. I've been over to Ukraine myself twice, way before this this war broke out. But I was well aware of some deep concerns. And I was saying earlier, the problem with Ukraine is it seems to have now been sanctified and beatified as the victim, and it can do no wrong. And I understand all of those things. But the other thing is, Putin's not a good man. You cannot believe him. You know, he took over Crimea, was allowed to have it. Now he's in Ukraine. I'm not saying the West have played this well. The West have been utterly abysmal, and they're the ones who deserve the hardest spanking, frankly. And I was really pleased when J.D. Vance gave an oral spanking to the lot of them at the Munich conference and made the organiser cry. That was brilliant, giving them some home truths. But if this now flips in the other direction of Putin essentially goes, do you know what? I was able to go into a country, start a war and get the things I wanted in the first place, access and control of Black Sea ports, rare earth minerals and all the rest of it, then the message being sent out to other would-be invaders of other countries, including China, isn't good.
Well, I think keep in mind, though, that NATO expanding towards Russia was not, Putin and Russia lying. The U.S. had agreed, the West had agreed not to expand Putin in that or to expand NATO in that direction. And then of all the, abysmally stupid comments made the last few weeks, the head of NATO claiming that Ukraine was still winning this conflict. It's just that the front line was moving in the wrong direction. You can't make up the kind of idiocy we were getting from leadership that provoked the war when it was a clear red line of NATO moving closer to Russia was not going to be tolerated. Now, look, I think we've got to be very careful, as Ronald Reagan used to always say, trust but verify. I don't think you trust what Russia or what Putin is saying. I think you verify every step of the way. I think that if the U.S. and Russia resume economic trade and prosperity in addition to bringing peace, the U.S. will be involved in both reconstruction in Ukraine and business in Ukraine. That puts the U.S. there. And as President Trump had said, look, we don't need NATO to defend it. We'll defend our business interests. So the U.S. will be there to protect, Ukraine and Ukrainian interests in what remains.
Yeah, I think, I've always thought that, well, not always thought, but I have been sort of considering the idea that actually saying we want a stakehold in access to rare earth minerals so important in the 21st century incentivizes American protection of that asset and therefore protecting Ukraine. But I do think that what Britain needs to do, and especially we've got CPAC coming up and we've got Nigel Farage going over there, Liz Truss going over there, I think they're both on the same hymn sheet when it comes to this situation there or thereabouts, is I think we also need to make the case to America, which is, look, when we see Donald Trump almost giving Putin what he wants, we want to say to you, look, we got a special relationship. This man has killed people on our own soil. His agents have been setting fire to all sorts of things, committing attacks of arson on our own soil. He takes part, his nefarious actors take part in cutting energy cables, trying to destabilize us as a country under the sea. He hacks into critical systems and tries to create blackouts. He's been flooding us with migrants. Yes, Europeans have done nothing about closing their borders and dealing with this, but Russia's hand and the Wagner mercenaries' hands in creating the floods of migration in part as an act of grey zone warfare. He doesn't like us over in Europe. Now, that might not be happening to you, the other side of the pond, because you're maybe a bit too far away, but he's on the attack against us, and we're well aware of that, and we want to know that, Europe needs to get its act together, but we want to know that America's got our backs.
Well, I think we need to keep in mind that the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline was not Russia destroying their own pipeline. That was the West doing it to provoke more attacks and more warfare. The same way that we're seeing Keir Starmer say, we're going to put British troops into Ukraine. You know, Keir Starmer's poll numbers are not quite as bad as Zelensky's, but they're headed that way. You start seeing Brit soldiers brought back in body bags and Brit moms grieving that, his poll numbers will go even lower than they are. He'll have to leave the basement of the Downing Street just to go upstairs to get above his poll numbers. So you know, there's a lot of work politically that Europe has to do, and Keir Starmer and Britain have to do to become bigger world players in this kind of new Trump order, new world order. And I think that discussions in the next few weeks will be interesting to watch there. You know, whether it's tariffs, whether it's economic trade, the special relationship between the U.S. and Britain is going to remain. Our people like each other. Sometimes our governments don't, but our people tend to have that affiliation. And I think that's what's going to control things to the bitter end.
Yeah, well, I hope so. My worry is, and if you hear from a lot of people, particularly over in Eastern Europe, and we're talking about really, you know, good old countries like Poland, who always pay their fair share when it comes to the percentage of GDP going towards defence. Got a lot of Poles who came over to America. When it comes to some of those former USSR satellite states who know what it's like to live under Russia, they're the ones saying to the Western Europeans, the likes of, you know, France and Spain, Ireland, who couldn't give two hoots, you got to help us, because give an inch, you'll take a mile. Putin will be back in our territories before you know it, and we don't want to go back to this. And I understand that that's a very, very real concern. And Europe has been divided on this because Germany has wanted to live off the teat of Russian gas. And my concern is with this, that, you know, Putin, I think trying to second guess what he wants is almost pointless. What you've got to do is put the barricades in place. So if he does want to march into Lithuania or Estonia, he can't. And my concern is that at the moment, all the sort of green lights are flashing, you know, to him on his dashboard going, I've gotten away with going into Ukraine. Why not take the next step?
Well, I think those are legitimate concerns. I think there's still a lot of work to do. As you mentioned, Crimea. The people in Crimea, the people in eastern Ukraine, Donbass, Donetsk, you know, Mariupol, they voted overwhelmingly to join the former Russian empire and be part of the new Russia. So these are Russian people who speak Russian who are affiliating there. I don't think the same thing is true with most of Western Europe, and certainly even the former satellites like Lithuania and others that you mentioned. But I do think it's worth, as you said, paying attention to any red lights or red flags that pop up, and I think we will. And like you said, you've been to Ukraine. You know, I think there's still big stumbling blocks on the negotiation table. What do you do with Odessa? Is that going to be given as part of the deal? Is that going to, you know, still be a flashpoint? So I think there's still a lot to be negotiated, even though right now, you know, it looks like things are moving in the positive direction. You know, again, like Reagan said, trust but verify.
I wanted to pick you up on the Odessa thing because I think this is absolutely critical to the whole conversation and the way that I think Europe might be able to appeal to Trump strategically. Because when it comes to Odessa, one of the biggest ports, so much stuff that the rest of the world needs comes out of that port. We're talking about grain, we're talking about cooking oils, we're talking about fertilizer. Ukraine is basically the breadbasket for a lot of developing world countries, and we've seen how that's already been war gamed, cutting off supplies coming out of Odessa, creating global inflation. What I would say is this: who are Russia's mates? Russia's mates aren't America. Russia's best mates are China, North Korea, Iran, who are all, as far as I'm concerned, enemies of the West. Now, those are nations who have been doing big naval exercises together, roping in a bit of South Africa as well. If Russia's given access and more control over the Black Sea, Iran's got control over the Red Sea via the Houthi rebels, China's trying to take control of all seas, is not therefore then saying to Putin, great, have that coastline, essentially saying to the anti-Western axis, here you go, we'll help you on your way to trying to screw over the West.
Well, I think that's one of the brilliant things that we're seeing from Trump right now. He's trying to create a wedge to help create that divide between China and Russia. I mean, one of the byproducts that was so bad about this situation in Ukraine is the sanctions and everything else pushed Russia and China closer together. And it is China, with their Belt and Road Initiative, has been making major advances in South America, in China, as you mentioned, obviously expanding their role in Asia to increase their threat over Taiwan and Japan and South Korea. And in Africa, it is China that has been playing there, not the U.S. And that wedge that might be potentially driven economically between China and Russia could be the biggest positive byproduct of this that we could see, in addition to stopping the carnage in Ukraine. So I think you're on the right path when you raise the alarm bells about certain things. But again, I think that the strategy of helping to push China and Russia a little bit further apart than Biden pushed them together is certainly a good move by Trump.
Well, I hope you're right about that. I'm unfortunately Russia's best mates with Iran as well. The amount of weapons being exchanged between them, North Korean soldiers who are basically just China's patsies actually serving over there for the Russians. So, but, you know, I'm optimistic. I am an optimist. I like Trump. I think he can do a great deal of good. Was a bit alarmed today. Steve, maybe you've settled my nerves a little bit. Thank you ever so much for coming on and giving us the story from the other side of the Atlantic. Your thoughts on that? On what Steve has said here, he's sort of laying out that actually tactically this is good. The West has got to wake up to some home truths. It is very much the line we've heard from the Republican Party. Yeah. Well, increasingly, this, Steve was of course a former advisor to Clinton and Bush. So I don't think you can turn around and go, Steve's like a hard and fast mad MAGA. He's basically saying that you've been fed a certain side of the narrative by your own media. Yeah. And now this is the truth of the situation. We live in a post-truth world, I'd say. Well, a new truth world.
It's no different to what I've been saying for a very long time, which is that Ukraine has lost that territory. It's not getting it back. You can't actually envisage a situation though where Russia is allowed to take Odessa or Mykolaiv or somewhere like that, because Ukraine still needs to be a functioning country that can export its own goods through the Black Sea. The war has to come to an end at some point, and the thing is that Ukraine has lost, because Western powers were not prepared to back it militarily at the time. It's lost so much manpower that it can't win this conflict anymore. Russia is just too big, and every time somebody turns around and go, oh, but look at how many people they've lost. Yes, they can afford to lose that many people because they're that much bigger. Yeah. This is what happens when you leave yourself weak, when you decide actually you don't want to pursue your own strength. You will become effectively prey for larger powers. But we also have to recognize this is a problem for Russia as well. This is why Russia is trying to be much more territorially expansive. And you were picking up on the conversation there about the friendship with China. Russia is not friends with China. Russia is very much at the mercy of China should China decide. China has territorial claims on great swathes of Russia's east. And this was always the thing when people were talking about, oh, well, what if the Russian government were to collapse? There'd be Chinese troops in Vladivostok by the end of the week, in Sakhalin. They'd be doing this.
Don't you, how far Russia stretches across
these countries have fought wars almost within living memory, and that actually that they have exchanged territory a lot. China is also betting big on the Arctic and Antarctic, actually, for mineral exploitation. The north of China is incredibly weak in terms of things like natural resources, rare earth minerals, but also basic things like water. Well, Lake Baikal is just over the border there. Actually, that is a very tasty morsel if you're China, and Russia can't defend its eastern borders at all. So you have to remember it's a difficult balancing act, and here I suppose is the one thing that you're saying is kind of going in the West's favour if you did want a peace deal. A lot of those soldiers will end up going straight the other way to reinforce those regions, which right now Russia does not consider of optimal importance. Yeah. But that's not to say that it never would be the case. Russia, it's always the thing, turn the map of Russia upside down, look at it from the perspective of Moscow. There are enemies in every single direction and a hell of a large border to try and defend.
That's always the way of geopolitics, is multi-dimensional chess. You're like a little baby Kissinger, aren't you? Just need the big black bins.
I'm going to get people protesting against me as I leave the building. That's not something. I mean, I'll take the compliment, but also don't say it again if people get the wrong idea.
Kissinger. All right, we're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, Henry and I will be answering your calls. The number to dial 0344 499 1000 87222 on text. Remember to talk before your message. Back after this.
He's changed his LinkedIn. He's admitted that he made a mistake. The government have said that he will probably be sorry for having done it. So I don't think there's any doubt that it's happened. The question is what happens to him now?
Yeah. And I think if he's misled the House, there'll be consequences that may involve him resigning as a government minister, Secretary of State. I don't know, and I say I'm not somebody who goes around willy-nilly calling for people's resignations. There is a process that needs to happen.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back to the show. We're gonna do voice notes and calls. I don't know why I just invented a jingle on the spot. I should never do that again. It was weird, it was uncomfortable. Even I want to rewind the last minute and pretend that did not happen. Yeah, let's save myself with a voice note. Shut up, Henry. Here's a voice note from Mark.
Yeah, hello Alex, it's Gavin. R.E. Meghan Markle. I think the ideal name for a programme that is all about her is Hands Up Who Likes Me. What do you think?
I think that's a really good idea, and whoever put Mark on Meghan Markle on the screen, I'm like, here's Mark, and he goes, all right, it's Gavin. Well, thanks for that. Brilliant. Got some sort of, you know, sleeper cells in my gallery. A Tech Up. It was Tech Up, of all people. Oh, Tech Up. I thought you were my bestie. Things have changed, Tech Up. Things have changed.
Everybody is watching this now and really confused by what's going on because you're having a conversation straight down the camera. And
but
like, you talking to
it's
me?
actually over there to Tech Up. They can't see Tech Up. I often do refer to him. I think people might think he's actually some sort of what are the people called in Nepal? A Sherpa. Tech Up. I think he sounds like Tech Up. I think he sounds like a Sherpa. Anyway, here's somebody who may be from Northamptonshire, maybe called Moz. It depends whether Tech Up is playing a game or not.
Morning. I'm disabled. I have PTSD, mental health issues. I have spinal issues where I've just had an operation. I have fibromyalgia, and I work full-time as a truck driver. So you can be disabled and you can work. I know my case is separate to many other people who can't physically work, but majority of disabled people still can.
I love him. What an amazing voice note. Okay, my dad was a truck driver, so I've got a massively soft spot for truck drivers. But I think it's really important that my uncle, for instance, I don't like bringing family into it, my late uncle suffered terribly with MS, passed away as a result of it. But he wanted to work until the very last minute. He was a computer genius and had sort of computer screens projected onto the ceiling in front of him. And I love it when I hear people like that who basically say, look, I'm suffering. I have had every obstacle put in front of me when it comes to work and whether I'm able to do it, and I'm out there still doing it. And I'm not saying that I should guilt anybody who feels that they can't work into saying, well, you should take that. But I think it's always positive to hear people saying, I'm grabbing life by the nettle and getting on.
And the thing is, the move to remote working should have made it easier for people to be able to re-engage with the workforce who previously weren't able to. And instead, what it has led to is a massive increase in the number of people who say, actually, I can't work at all. There's a problem with that correlation there because it should be in the opposite direction.
Perfectly fit and healthy, able-bodied people who once upon a time were sane and go into office jobs 9 till 5 and I can't come in, I've got, I'm nervous, I've got anxiety, I need to work from home. That is a hangover from COVID. Before working from home was a thing, people just got on with going into offices. Now nobody can do it.
But I've got to be honest, the idea of working from home has never especially bothered me. Like, I know that some people are really opposed to it. It's never especially bothered me because it depends on the company and the employees. And good managers will be able to work out who works well from home, who doesn't. But you're always going to get people in any company who try and skive, who try and do the bare minimum.
They're the ones who lurk around the water cooler in offices as well. They're also time wasters in a building.
It doesn't matter if those people work from home or the office. They'll always do it.
Oh,
and the flip side is, people who are really efficient in the office are probably going to be even more efficient doing it from home because they've got even more motivation to work very quickly and to get things done.
Because they've actually got the drive.
Yeah, because and also they're not wasting time on a commute and things like that.
You make a very good point, but I think unfortunately because there are rubbish managers and we don't really have many ways of eyes on, especially when it comes to if you're dealing with, I mean, I'm just going to use estate agents because I can't stand estate agents. If you're an estate agent and you're listening, that excludes you. And of course Russell Quirk, who's basically just a glorified estate agent, isn't he? We love him, but you know, I've had to try and for the last how many months deal with my estate agent. I've never known such useless, ridiculous, boneheaded, bone-idle, inefficient people. Don't reply to emails, don't pick up calls. I had my bathroom literally leaking into my kitchen, into the electrics of my kitchen for about 3 months before they were able to coordinate someone to come and repair it.
Well, that's
3 months.
Yeah, there's, as I say, the culture seems to be trending in the wrong direction from where it should.
This is the thing, I know they're working from home because you phone up the landline number, they're never at their desk, they're never in the office.
But here is
they're sitting at home.
Here is a difficult conversation to be had about how you maintain and ensure people are actually being productive. At what point do you also say your employer can actually monitor you when you're in your own home?
Yeah, spy on you in your own house.
This is a difficult question to have.
Yeah, because people have those mouse trackers and stuff, don't they, where it makes the mouse move every now and then.
Productivity.
So, I mean,
and it's you know, it's very un-British, I'd say, the idea that your boss should be able to monitor you whilst you're in your own home. But if that's what people want to do,
to sit under a slanket and work from their sofa. Let's speak to Chris in Hereford. Hi, Chris.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, my darling. How are you? I love Hereford. What a brilliant part of the world. Have you ever been to the National Cider Museum?
I have, yes. I live at, well, I don't live in Hereford, I live in Herefordshire.
Oh, I love Herefordshire. Oh, land of proper booze, that place, with cider. Not allowed to talk about it. They all went, oh my God, in the gallery as soon as I said, have you been to the National Cider Museum? Anyway, we're not talking about cider, even though it's my specialist subject on Mastermind. We're talking about worklessness. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I've got health conditions as long as your arm. I have now been diagnosed with Graves' disease. And I still work. I'm going to work until the doctor tells me not to work. You know what I mean?
And what's your motivation? Is this because you just really love what you do? Is it because you think it's far better for yourself, your own mental health, to go out and work? Or is it for the money?
If I won the lottery tomorrow, no word of a lie, if I won the lottery tomorrow, I would still work because the simple reason it's good for your mental health. Because the simple reason is you're getting out, speaking to people, you're not stuck in the home. Because like 3 or 4 years ago, I almost died of a heart failure.
Oh.
And basically, I was at home for 3 months, and that bored me senseless.
Yeah.
So, but I'm now working. I now work. I've got loads of conditions. I've got Graves' disease. I've got learning disabilities. And I'm not basically, but I want to carry on until I can not work at all, and that'll be the worst day of my life when the doctor tells me that I can't work anymore. That will be the end for me.
All I can say is, here, Chris. I really love that. That used to be the sort of called the Protestant work ethic, didn't it? Because I'd be the same. Like, I've just had flu for 3 weeks, and I came back to work way too soon. If anyone saw me on air a week ago last Thursday, I don't know, I did it for 3 hours, but I was determined to come back in because I blimmin' love a bit of work. I go mental if I'm sitting at home bouncing off the walls. But I suppose everyone's different. Now, listen, we're going to take a short break now. Coming up after the break, a social entrepreneur, former MEP, we sat together in the European Parliament, but now an expert in child social care is going to tell us some pretty grisly and gruelling truths about that sector. You will be shocked. And then after that, we've got former Prime Minister Liz Truss. Back after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. As billed just before the break, I'm now joined by a very good friend of mine, Louis Steadman-Bryce. We were back in a previous life MEPs together in the European Parliament, the trouble that we caused.
We did indeed.
Gosh, that's how he became a good mate of mine. But anyway, we're not talking anything about Brexit or politics particularly, because since leaving that European Parliament, you've gone into, well, tell us what you do essentially, which is all about children's services.
Yes, so I set up an organisation called Inkfish, and basically what we're trying to do is to come up with creative solutions to solve or contribute to solving the crisis in children's services at the moment.
Now, talking about the crisis in children's services, because this is what we've got you in for, some of the things that you have told me are harrowing, absolutely harrowing. So a convicted offender applying to convert a property into a children's home in Leeds.
That's, yeah, it's unbelievable. This is a recent development that came out, and it was picked up, I think, by the BBC. I think somebody had probably whistleblown on this, a member of the public, but the fact that they got so far down the line with this until it was discovered, this guy had gone to prison for 2.5 years.
For what?
For sexual offences against children. And so is on a register somewhere, but the unbelievable thing is that under the guidelines for planning, the council couldn't legally have prevented that application going through.
What? So basically this guy was in a grooming gang.
Yeah.
And he owned properties, and he wanted to turn these into children's homes. And we know that by and large, many of the victims of grooming gangs are vulnerable children living in children's homes.
Yeah.
And this was just sort of signed off, and they couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah, so he wasn't going to operate it. It was his property. So there was a company that was coming in to lease that from him and operate it, but they had no knowledge. So, of course, once they found out, they ran a mile, and I believe they're suing the guy now to recover their costs.
Well, good luck to them. I mean, now you've got a situation as well that all these kids who need somewhere to live. So a report in December of last year, 2024, revealed that 775 children, some as young as 2, who desperately need places to live, you know, poor wee orphans or whatever they may be, people from broken homes who are not in the adoption system, not necessarily in foster care, are being put in hotels, Airbnbs and caravans.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unbelievable when you think about it. You know, one of the most developed countries in the world, and we're in a situation where local authorities are being forced to place children into, as you say, Airbnbs, hotels, caravans, and holiday parks to that as well.
This is illegal to do that, right? Yeah. To put young kids, you know, some as young as 2, just being sent to Lord knows where, which don't have the provisions necessary to deal with this. Somehow we can find all the money in the world to roll out the red carpet for migrants going to hotels, and our own little kiddies are potentially being put into a children's home run by a grooming gang abuser, and in some sort of caravan.
Yeah, it is
our own kids.
It is really bad. It is really bad. It's you know, missingpeople.org have said that 1 in 10 children who are classified as looked after children go missing, and that's compared to 1 in 200 in the general population. Now, with regards to unaccompanied migrant children, that's 1 in 3.
So
now,
1 in 3 of them go missing.
One in 3 of them go missing for the unaccompanied migrant children, and it's you know, it's really interesting.
And do we know where they're going?
No, because I can find all of the data on the number of the children going in, but I cannot find the data on the children that are never found. So it says in the government reports that a majority of those children are found. However, they don't have any data around the children that aren't found. So
do we know sort of any idea how old these kids are? I mean, is it possible that they're sort of, you know, 15, 16, 17, have gone into sort of, you know, work in the black market and stuff like that? They might not.
I think in that situation it's going to be slightly older children, but they still are children and they still need to be protected.
Oh, but also we don't know who they are. We don't want people of any age going missing, but when you hit your teens, then, you know, you're just as capable of doing things that shouldn't happen as an adult. But when you look into the statistics of this, 3,033 looked after children by local authorities being exploited. Exploited. I mean, What are we talking about here when we hear this word exploited? How, in what sense?
It's hard to quantify, if I'm honest with you, and there's various different reports out there. I think one of the things that is really clear, that there is a link. There's got to be a link to the unregistered illegal children's homes and the way that this is happening. We've seen a tremendous rise in the amount of children going into care over the last 10 years. I think it's something like 25% increase of children being taken into care, and I believe that that's a direct result of the government defunding the early intervention programmes through forced austerity. It's very easy to bash the local authorities on this and say, look, they're not doing a great job, but the reality of the situation is that they have to work with what they've got. It's a statutory requirement for a local authority to place a child, so if they haven't got suitable accommodation, what do they do with them? They can't put them in the council offices, so they've got to put them somewhere, and that's why they have to resort to these unregistered placements.
And some of these kids, as a result, I mean, almost half of these children went missing. So, I mean, these are kids, essentially, and like you said, as a society, we should have an obligation to make sure we look after vulnerable children. It's not their fault. When they got broken homes, they got parents incapable of looking after them. I mean, the amount of time care workers get bashed over not following proper checks and balances, or perhaps not being stringent enough about removing children from dangerous situations. We've seen horrific tragedies result from that. But then it sounds to me like when kids are being removed from these situations, they're still not going to safe environments.
In some situations, no. But I think we need to balance this with the amount of good care that's out there. There are around 600, I think, registered children's homes that are Ofsted registered, that are classified as, requires improvement or inadequate, which is appalling when you think about it. I don't know how many children are cared for in that situation, but it's a really wide problem. And there are some initiatives out there that are doing some good work, and I think that there was a white paper that came out in November where the government have announced all these sweeping changes. Some of it I think is good, some of it I don't necessarily think is good because it doesn't tie up. We want to see a mixed approach to this sector, and there is there's something going on here where the government have pushed up national insurance charges. So
right, yeah. So
and that has an impact.
People just think this is going to affect someone, a big manufacturer. No, it affects the care sector as well. Louis, thank you ever so much for coming in, for bringing this to my attention, because I had no idea how dreadful the situation was. When it comes to kids, they don't pick the world they're born into. They don't pick their parents. And we must be in a position where we can protect vulnerable children, particularly in the light of what we know about the grooming gang scandal. Absolutely. And to find out that the situation is so porous that someone who went to prison for being in a grooming gang is trying to create a children's home, it beggars belief. Louis, thank you ever so much, and thanks for coming into the studio.
Thank you very much, Alex.
Right, we're going to take a short break now, but when I'm back after the break, I'm delighted to say I'm going to be joined by former PM Liz Truss. Back after this.
recognise that Donald Trump had a lot of business interests in Russia when he was before he was last president, and those business interests have been affected by the sanctions and everything else that's been put on. How much that's influencing him politically, I don't know. But the other thing that we have to recognise is that the United States has got an eye on the relationship between Russia and China, and they see China as a much bigger threat. And what they will want to try and do is put as much of a wedge between that relationship.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back to the show, the dying embers of the show, but we're going to bring it all back to life because I'm joined now by former Prime Minister Liz Truss. Liz, it's a great honour to have you on the programme. First time we've done this together, actually. And live from Washington, D.C., where it's still pretty early in the morning. You're a brave woman getting up and facing me at the crack of dawn. You're over there, of course, for CPAC, and you're over there at a really interesting time because all of a sudden this huge debate has erupted, really pitting Europe against America on the way forward with Ukraine. So before we talk about what we're going to talk about, I just want to ask you about your reaction to the sort of stuff Trump has said today, so demanding essentially that Zelenskyy holds elections and essentially turning around and saying, well, you kind of started this. Do you understand where he's coming from? Are you going to sort of go and potentially try and tell other people at CPAC that's not necessarily the sensible approach?
Well, it's very clear that Vladimir Putin started the war in Ukraine with his aggression, and he's always had an ambition of creating a greater Russia. And what needs to happen is Russia must not allow to win from the conflict that they started in the first place. But these talks were in early days, and what I'm interested to know is what actually comes out of them. There's a lot of speculation in the media. There's been a lot of different policies sort of floated over the last few days. But my view is Putin is the aggressor in this conflict. And ultimately, if he succeeds in being rewarded for invading Ukraine, he won't stop in Ukraine. And that's a worry for everybody in Europe.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people are in agreement with you. But what you really want to talk about is essentially doging Britain. You've had a look at what they've done the other side of the pond. You and I are in agreement over this. The sort of MAGA movement 2.0 has really sort of set things on fire when it comes to looking into drilling into the deep state, making sure people who aren't in line with the government are sort of encouraged to leave their jobs to slimline the system, and also see where money is being spent and whether it's being spent into the right places. You essentially want a Trumpian revolution here in Britain. Tell me about that.
That's right. And what people have to understand is the situation in Britain is far worse than it is in America. The president is currently able to appoint 5,000 people into the administration to carry out his wishes. Now, Trump is working to get more appointees, to get rid of some of the career civil servants who actually stopped him doing what he was trying to do back in 2016. In Britain, there's virtually nobody that a prime minister gets to appoint. They're all career bureaucrats. And what Tony Blair did is he gave them more and more power. He created more outsourced agencies. So we have so many things like the Migration Advisory Committee, the Climate Change Committee, the Bank of England got all these extra powers, the Judiciary became unaccountable. And you can see what's happening now, that judges are making decisions that should really be in the political arena. So we have to reverse all that in order to be able to have a Doge revolution in Britain. And a lot of people are talking about Doge, but Doge isn't just a process of going into departments and finding out what they're spending. The Trump revolution is also about changing the entire structure of government so that the people are in charge again, not the technocrats. And in Britain, we've got so many failures, whether it's failures on the grooming gangs and the Home Office and the CPS, whether it's failures on the Post Office, where people committed suicide because of a rogue algorithm, whether it's a failure on the economy. And a lot of these failures lead back to the fact there is no accountability in us.
Now, in terms of the failures that you highlight, the other thing that Trump has really been quite strong on is the idea that the deep state has tried to take him down. And I think that a lot of people, especially when you look at all the lawfare being pumped out by the Democrats, being aided and abetted by judges, it's quite clear to see that there were people in positions working at counterpoint to Donald Trump to a very dangerous level. Your experience as Prime Minister dealing with the quangocracy, and of course yourself having, lifting up the bonnet and looking at that deep state, understanding what it is and how it might work. Do you think that more often than not, if they don't like a Prime Minister, they'll do what they can to try and prevent that Prime Minister doing what that Prime Minister wants to do, and eventually trying to essentially rid them of that Prime Minister?
Well, that is what happened to me. They didn't like what I was trying to do. They are net zero fanatics. They want big government. And what I wanted to do is get fracking, cut taxes, get the British economy going, and they didn't like it. So they certainly didn't try and help me. And what happened in the case of the market crisis of 2022, the Bank of England have since admitted it was their fault. They've admitted that 2/3 of all of that market movement was down to their failure to regulate pensions. But they were successfully blamed it on me. And as you know, Alex, we've got a very supine mainstream media in this country. They spend a lot of their time being briefed and leaked to by the permanent bureaucracy. And they tend to be on the side of the Bank of England or the Home Office, not the elected politicians who are trying to get things done. And if you look at the last 14 years of Conservative government, now, many mistakes were made. But a lot of the time, those Conservative ministers were actually operating in an environment that was fundamentally hostile to what they were trying to do. And what I'm saying to people is we're going to have this dreadful Keir Starmer government for some time. But I think there will be a new government in 2029. I think British people will be thoroughly fed up. But unless that government does something about the permanent bureaucracy, unless they repeal all those Blairite laws like the Climate Change Act, the Human Rights Act, nothing in this country will change. The same bureaucrats will still be in charge.
I want to pick up on that in a bit about the future of who might govern this country and how they should do it. But I want to go back to your time in office as Prime Minister, because it's quite rare to be able to sit down to a former Prime Minister who speaks as candidly as you do about what really goes on. And you talk about your mini budget, which today, swathes of the mainstream media, the legacy media still sort of talk about. You sent a cease and desist letter to Sir Keir Starmer saying, you've got to stop saying I crashed the economy. It is not true. And I've only come sort of late to the table on this one in understanding what went on in those 24 hours preceding you actually putting forward your mini budget and the Bank of England's role in all of this. Tell me about that period of time.
What happened was the day before the mini budget, unbeknownst to me, the Bank of England announced that they were selling £40 billion worth of government gilts. Now, that is a huge amount of gilts to put on the market. And what that essentially did is that queered the pitch. It queered the pitch, and it created a sort of train of events, if you like. It started off a chain reaction in the gilt market. And the problem was that Britain was very exposed to these products called LDIs, which are a type of, it's basically the pension market betting that interest rates would never go up. And what was happening is interest rates were going up, so they were all caught with their trousers down, and they immediately had to sell more and more gilts. Now, it was the responsibility of the Bank of England to regulate financial stability. But what happened is they used the mini budget, which had taken place on the Friday, as the reason there were all these problems in the gilt market. As I've said, they subsequently admitted that 2/3 of all of that market movement that took place in 2022 was down to the whole LDI issue and the fact that these pension funds had been exposed in the same way as lots of financial organizations were exposed in 2008. It was a similar type of financial crisis, but nobody talks about that. The mainstream media doesn't talk about that because they want the narrative that it was my fault. And we're now in a situation where Rachel Reeves is doing terrible economics, putting up taxes, putting up regulation, banning fracking, banning oil and gas. And the economy is really in a terrible state. But the big difference between her and me is the Bank of England is backing what she's doing.
Right, she's singing to their
backing
tune.
what she's doing. So all of the objective figures are worse. So gilt rates have gone higher under Rachel Reeves than they did under me. Economic growth is much lower than it was when I was in office, but she is not getting anywhere like the level of flack. And that you start asking questions about who is running the country.
Right. No, but this is what is so alarming about what you're saying, because, I mean, correct me if I'm sort of synthesising this in a sort of too much of a lackadaisical way, but the Bank of England had failed in their job as a regulator. Pension funds were massively overexposed. And it seems to me they deliberately timed their big sell-off of gilts, which was going to have big ramifications on the markets. They deliberately timed this to cover their own backs, to be able to point the finger of blame at you when you then did the mini budget and said, oh, look at the timing, it must have been her. Because if that is true, if the independent Bank of England, which is no longer under really any governance by a sovereign elected parliament, can do that in an attempt to bring down a prime minister because it has messed up, that is deeply foreboding.
It is very, very worrying. And it's why it really radicalised me that time in office, because I'd spent 10 years fighting the system. I knew that the civil service were, not on my side on a lot of the key issues, but I thought fundamentally, given enough pressure, they would do what they needed to do. What I discovered during my time in Number 10 is that they were prepared to be underhand. They were prepared to be seriously underhand in blaming me for their failings so that they could essentially get rid of somebody they didn't want in office.
I mean, that is absolutely shocking. And I think, most of the Anglophone world are waking up now to the idea that there is a so-called deep state, that there are people who are not elected, who are unaccountable, who wield far too much power and influence, who have tried to stop Donald Trump in his tracks by having, a sort of radical policy, the likes of which you want to see happen in the UK, the likes of which you wanted to do as Prime Minister, and in many respects had a mandate to do because the Conservative Party members had chosen you. And that they've managed to destabilise it, and the legacy media just go, oh, well, look at that, it's all Liz Truss's fault. I mean, I don't expect any different from them. But what you're outlining here is a system that indeed needs radical overhaul and how it might be done, and that there probably is going to be a change of government. So my question to you is, how do we then proceed, or how does this country proceed in that situation? Because what we've looked at now is essentially the right-wing voters who would support your sort of economic plan have to choose between the Conservative Party and Reform UK.
And by the way, I think it's not just right-wing voters here. I think there are a lot of people, and it's very interesting Trump has brought in people like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard. There are a lot of people who don't like the system in Britain, who are anti-system voters, and who are really frustrated that whoever they vote for, the same bureaucrats and technocrats are in power. So I think there has to be an alliance of people also who traditionally might have voted for the Labour Party, probably people who voted Brexit, but people who need to see things really change in the country and power flow from the people rather than power flow from the Blairite technocracy. So I think it's, seats like Rotherham or Barnsley, you can see those seats changing hands because voters are so frustrated. So I don't think what's happened in America is there's been a real political alignment with new areas voting for Donald Trump. And I think that's what a coalition of forces should be looking to do at the next election.
So you say sort of coalition of forces. Are you thereby sort of suggesting that basically the right is going to need to unite in order to unseat the left? Because there's no, I mean, at the moment that there is sort of spurious media commentary on whether or not Reform and the Conservatives could do a deal, and we're a long way off a general election. You're now in a position where you're not in the Conservative, well, you might probably still a member of the Conservative Party, but not sitting as an MP anymore, and can be on the outside looking in at Kemi Badenoch and her leadership. How do you think it's going? Is she going to be able to rebuild that party come the next election, or should people be looking at Reform instead?
I think the trouble she's got is that the Conservative MPs in the Parliamentary Party, and this is one of the problems I had along with the efforts of the Bank of England. The Conservative MPs in the Parliamentary Party, quite a lot of them don't want the type of radical change we're talking about. They don't want to leave the ECHR. They don't want to repeal the Human Rights Act. They don't want to get rid of net zero. They don't want to make the Bank of England accountable. They don't want to make the judiciary accountable. And that is what the country needs. So what I think should happen in the Conservative Party is we need to get to the crunch on those issues. What do people actually believe about those issues? What does Kemi Badenoch think? What do Conservative MPs think? Because the country is facing a really serious crisis.
Right.
You know, it's a legitimacy and governance crisis.
And if the Conservatives can't get their act together, if the Conservatives remain split and can't get their act together,
I suspect quite a lot of Conservative MPs would not support that agenda. I know they didn't when I was in office, and I see no evidence that the 121 that are left are the radical part of the Conservative Party.
And so should Conservative voters go to reform?
I'd like to see the best of the Conservatives and the best of reform get together. I mean, God knows how that will happen. But if there is enough pressure from the public, and I think this is what's also interesting, we're seeing the farmers protesting, we're seeing people protesting about the grooming gangs and the appalling terrorist attack in Southport. So we're seeing people now rising up about how badly the country is governed, and that momentum, it needs to form into a political movement, because it wasn't just Donald Trump. You also had the MAGA movement and the Tea Party movement who were saying, this is enough. We're not happy with the way our country is governed.
Liz, thank you so much for joining us from Washington. You're going to be speaking at CPAC later, which is kind of like the sort of American right-wing policy jamboree. Benedict, we've only got a minute left, but your thoughts on, essentially, I mean, where do you want to pick up this? A deep state of Britain?
I mean, I think Liz Truss is right when she says that actually we have bigger problems here, and that